Chapter 119. After the weapon peak face-off, the disciples dispersed gradually. The disheveled old man stopped Su Zimo and walked to the spirit weapon chamber with a smile. The reward for being the number 1 of weapon peak is a spirit weapon of your choice from the spirit weapon chamber. Go on in. The disheveled old man felt proud that Su Zimo was number 1 of weapon peak and looked at Su Zimo with a gratified gaze. The spirit weapon chamber of weapon peak was filled with pseudo and inferior grade spirit weapons. As for middle grade spirit weapons, one had to be at Foundation Establishment Realm and become an inner sect disciple before they were qualified to receive them from Misty Peak. Actually, given Su Zimo's current weapon refinement skills, inferior grade spirit weapons were no longer attractive to him. However, this was the sect's spirit weapon chamber after all, and Su Zimo still intended to take a look around. There are many types of spirit weapons in the spirit weapon chamber. What are your plans? The disheveled old man asked. Su Zimo shook his head and asked, "Do you have any suggestions, master?" "I do have one." The disheveled old man pondered for a moment before saying, "After the 5 peaks face-off, you'll have a fight with Feng Haoyu. To be fair, your chances of winning aren't high." Of course, that was just a euphemism. In the eyes of the 5 peak masters, it wasn't that Su Zimo's chances of winning weren't low. They were that he had no chance at all. The disheveled old man continued, "Therefore, I suggest that you choose a defensive inferior grade spirit weapon. That way, even if you lose, you won't be severely injured with the protection of the defensive spirit weapon." There were 3 types of spiritual artifacts. The first was offensive spiritual artifacts, the most common of which was flying swords. The second was defensive spiritual artifacts, such as shields, heart-protecting mirrors, armors, and so on. The third was auxiliary spiritual artifacts, which had all kinds of shapes and uses. If it was an offensive spirit weapon, the more spirit patterns it had and the higher its grade, the stronger its killing power would be. Similarly, if it was a defensive spirit weapon, the higher its grade, the more damage it could defend against. Su Zimo nodded his head non-committally and entered the spirit weapon chamber. Inside the spiritual artifact pavilion there were rows of weapons. Most of them were flying swords. There were fewer defensive and auxiliary spirit artifacts. Su Zimo browsed through it from beginning to end, but didn't find anything particularly useful to him. Su Zimo could refine defensive spiritual artifacts at any time, so there was no need to choose them here. As for other types of spiritual weapons, they were of little value to Su Zimo. Just as Su Zimo was about to casually pick a spirit tool and leave, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a golden light from the corner of his eye. Su Zimo stopped in his tracks and looked over. After looking around, Su Zimo still couldn't find the source of the golden light. Just now it felt like an illusion. Su Zimo stood motionless in place. After pausing for a moment, the golden light flashed again. This time round Su Zimo took a closer look. The source of the golden light was in a corner of the defensive spirit weapon, and was reflected from the ground. Why is the ground reflecting the golden light? Su Zimo found it strange and walked closer to take a closer look. There seemed to be a golden silk cloth on the ground. It was covered in dust and nobody knew how long it had been there without anyone moving it. The golden light was refracted from this thick layer of dust. All the spirit weapons in the spirit weapon chamber, be it pseudo or inferior grade, were placed on their own stone shelves. Why was the golden silk cloth on the ground? Su Zimo waved his sleeves and wiped away the dust on it, focusing his gaze. The golden silk cloth seemed to be a defensive inner armor. It was a thin layer of gold and was laid on the ground. With a layer of dust, it was hard to notice even if one walked past it. It seemed to be a pseudo-spirit weapon. The reason why it seemed to be one was because there was a spirit pattern on the inner armor. However, it was broken into several pieces, and even if spirit chi was injected into it, it was clear that the true might of the spirit weapon could not be unleashed. However, the strange thing was that if a spirit weapon received a destructive blow, the spirit pattern would dissipate instead of breaking into several pieces. The spirit weapon would most likely shatter as well. However, the inner armor before him was not only intact, its spirit pattern had not dissipated. It was a contradiction. After pondering for a moment, Su Zimo decided to choose this pseudo-spirit weapon as his reward for being number 1 of weapon peak. Reaching out, Su Zimo casually grabbed the golden inner armor on the ground. Just as he was about to stand up and leave, His expression changed. It didn't budge? The golden silk armor was still on the ground, motionless. Even though Suzimo did not use his power of blood chi, that casual grab of his had a force of 500 kilograms. This thing is that heavy? Suzimo was surprised as he reached out with both hands and lifted. Although the golden inner armor was lifted slightly, it was still on the ground. Suzimo finally understood why the golden inner armor was casually tossed on the ground. If it was placed on a stone shelf, it would probably collapse from the weight. Suzimo's heart skipped a beat as he removed his storage bag. Channeling his bloodline, a scarlet light flashed through the depths of his eyes as green veins popped on the surface of his skin. With a shocking power, he yanked the golden inner armor up and stuffed it into his storage bag. No matter how heavy an item was, it would be as light as air once it entered his storage bag. Suzimo gradually calmed his bloodline and hid his demon form before walking out of the spirit weapon chamber. "You're done?" The disheveled old man was waiting at the entrance and asked when Suzimo came out. Suzimo nodded and hesitated for a moment before saying, "I saw a golden inner armor inside. It's a little strange and I don't know where it came from, so I brought it out." "Golden inner armor?" The disheveled old man frowned and pondered for a moment. His expression changed as he exclaimed, "Mystic gold silk armor. Mystic gold silk armor. So that's the name of this pseudo-spirit weapon," Suzimo murmured softly. "Pseudo-spirit weapon?" The disheveled old man's gaze turned extremely strange. "Isn't it a pseudo-spirit weapon? I saw a spirit pattern on it, but it was broken into a few pieces and can't be used anymore. It can only be considered as a pseudo-spirit weapon," Suzimo said. The disheveled old man lamented and suddenly asked, "Suzimo, do you know how many grades spirit weapons are divided into?" "There are 4 grades. Inferior grade, middle grade, superior grade and supreme grade," Suzimo replied. Pausing for a moment, Suzimo recalled a guess he had previously and said, "Supreme grade with 4 spirit patterns. There might be a perfect spirit weapon with 5 more." The disheveled old man nodded approvingly. "That's right. There are indeed perfect spirit weapons above supreme grade." Immediately after, the disheveled old man changed the topic and asked, "But do you know what's above perfect?" "There's something above perfect?" Suzimo was surprised. The disheveled old man said deeply, "Above perfect is connate spirit weapons." "What's a connate spirit weapon?" "It's born from heaven and earth and formed after absorbing countless years of spirit chi. There were 5 spirit patterns on perfect spirit weapons, but there were 6 on connate spirit weapons. The 6th is the connate pattern." Chapter 120. Connate pattern? Suzimo frowned in deep thought. The disheveled old man continued, "The broken parts on the mystic gold silk armor are the connate patterns. Since they are connate patterns, there's no way postnatal weapon refinement masters can create them no matter how strong they are." Suzimo gradually came to his senses and was shocked. He could not help but ask, "Master, you mean to say that the mystic gold silk armor is a connate spirit weapon?" "Originally it was." The disheveled old man reminisced and said slowly, "It said that 1,000 years ago, the mystic gold silk armor was one of the strongest defensive spirit weapons and was famous in the cultivation world. It's a pity that this item has been destroyed. The 5 postnatal spiritual patterns have all dissipated, leaving only one innate spiritual pattern, which has been broken into several pieces. Since a connate spirit weapon is so strong, what was it that destroyed it?" Suzimo could not help but ask. "That's too much." The disheveled old man chuckled. "Connate spirit weapons are spirit weapons at the end of the day. You have to know that above spirit weapons are dharmic weapons. For perfected being Jin Dan, connate spirit weapons are the best weapons that can only be chanced upon and not sought. Once one reaches nascent soul realm, they will naturally refine dharmic weapons and not use spirit weapons. A single powerful dharmic weapon is enough to destroy a connate spirit weapon. They're not on the same level at all." Suzimo roughly understood. No matter how sharp the weapons in the mortal world were, they could be easily destroyed by the spiritual weapons used by the self-cultivators. Then why is the mystic gold silk armor in the spirit weapon chamber of Weapon Peak? To Suzimo, the inner armor was a connate spirit weapon in the past after all. Even if it was destroyed, it was still stronger than other spirit weapons. The disheveled old man shook his head. There's only a broken connate pattern on the mystic gold silk armor, and it's equivalent to a pseudo-spirit weapon. Even though it can defend against sharp weapons, it can't defend against the power of spirit arts because it doesn't have any spirit patterns. In other words, even if a cultivator's sword could not penetrate the mystic gold silk armor, the power of the flying sword could still destroy the body's life force through the mystic gold silk armor. If the opponent was a Foundation Establishment cultivator, the mystic gold silk armor would not be able to defend against his spirit arts. The disheveled old man continued, furthermore, although the mystic gold silk armor is damaged, it's still heavy and weighs 5,000 kilograms. Which cultivator could bear it? That's why no one has touched it in the past 1,000 years. It's practically a useless spiritual artifact. It's 10,000 pounds. Even back then, there weren't many Jin Dan spiritual masters who had the ability and qualifications to wear it. The disheveled old man seemed to have thought of something and lamented. Su Zimo naturally knew the weight of the mystic gold silk armor. If he hadn't used the power of his bloodline, he wouldn't have been able to lift this seemingly thin inner armor. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly asked, since this mystic gold silk armor is in the sect, does that mean someone in the sect used to wear it? Old Zeo remained silent. Who is that person? Is he still in the sect right now? Su Zimo asked curiously. A shudder flashed through the depths of the disheveled old man's eyes. After a long time, he sighed gently and shook his head. That person is no longer in the sect and I've never seen him before. I've only heard some rumors about him. It's said that he was an expert of the sect 1,000 years ago, and was invincible among the Foundation Establishment and Jin Dan realms of the north region of Tianhuang mainland. No one could withstand his sharpness. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. How terrifying was it to be invincible in a cultivation realm? What happened after that? Su Zimo asked. I'm not sure. There were no more rumors about him. He died. Su Zimo frowned and thought about it. There's no way such a strong person would die so easily. However, why is that person not in the sect right now, and why does it seem like the disheveled old man is unwilling to mention him? What is he trying to avoid? After a moment of silence, the disheveled old man continued. Ever since the sect set up the 8 Distresses formation, only 2 people have made it through. One of them is you and the other is him. Su Zimo opened his mouth slightly. The disheveled old man waved it off, seemingly frustrated. Send the mystic gold silk armor back and choose another one. You won't be able to use this spirit weapon anyway. Given Su Zimo's current situation, the mystic gold silk armor was not suitable for him. However, for some reason, Su Zimo had a feeling that he might be able to use it in the future. After a moment of hesitation, Su Zimo said in a deep voice, "Thank you, Master. However, I've still decided to choose this mystic gold silk armor." The disheveled old man frowned and hesitated before sighing. Up to you. However, you have to be careful in your battle against Feng Haoyu. If you can't win, just admit defeat. Don't force yourself. Su Zimo could tell that the disheveled old man was concerned for him and agreed with a smile. Right, Master, I have a question about weapon refinement. Su Zimo changed the topic. To be honest, Master, I've already successfully refined an inferior grade spirit weapon before the weapon peak face-off. However, I don't know why I couldn't condense the second spirit pattern. Why is that? Haha. The disheveled old man could not help but laugh. Lad, you've really hidden yourself well. So, you've already refined an inferior grade spirit weapon. Not bad, not bad. Instinctively, the disheveled old man thought that Su Zimo had merely refined an inferior grade spirit weapon. After laughing, the disheveled old man said, Actually, the hardest part of weapon refinement is spirit gathering. However, the core step is tempering. That step requires way too much skill, and all the sects in the cultivation world that specialize in weapon refinement have their own unique tempering techniques. There are many impurities in spirit ores, and spirit fires alone are not enough to refine them. That's why you'll need a profound tempering technique to purge the impurities. If the tempering isn't on point and there are too many impurities, the spirit weapon forged won't be able to withstand the second spirit pattern forcefully. That's why the spirit gathering fails and the spirit weapon explodes. Su Zimo was enlightened. The reason why he could not condense the second spirit pattern wasn't because his spirit gathering technique was wrong or the grade of the spirit or wasn't high enough. It was because his tempering technique wasn't profound enough. The disheveled old man said, "The sect doesn't have a good tempering technique right now. However, don't be anxious or worried. Leave it to me." Yes, Suzimo could clearly sense the love and care that the disheveled old man had for him. That couldn't be faked. Suzimo bowed deeply before leaving on his sword. Looking at Suzimo's back view, the disheveled old man frowned. Actually, after Suzimo cultivated a level 3 spirit fire, the disheveled old man had already started searching for profound tempering techniques to help Suzimo raise his weapon refinement realm. However, it was a pity that tempering techniques had always been a secret of the sect and were way too difficult to obtain. Sigh, it's a pity that a bright pearl is covered in dust. The disheveled old man sighed internally and thought to himself that he would head out to take a look after the Five Peaks face-off. No matter what, he had to get his hands on a tempering technique manual for Suzimo. All of a sudden, the disheveled old man's expression changed as he recalled a detail that was almost overlooked. The mystic gold silk armor weighed 5,000 kilograms. How did Suzimo, a level 8 chi refinement warrior, manage to fit it into his storage bag? The more the disheveled old man thought about it, the more he felt that something was amiss. After pacing on the spot for a long time, he gave up on the thought of pursuing the matter. Seems like this disciple of mine isn't simple either. Chapter 121. After the Weapon Peak face-off, many disciples of the Five Peaks were still discussing and many of them were even preparing to celebrate. It was extremely lively. Suzimo did not join in and returned to his cave abode immediately. Getting number 1 of Weapon Peak was within his expectations. The only unexpected gain was the mystic gold silk armor in his storage pouch. By the time he returned, it was already noon. "I'm going into seclusion. Guard the door and don't let anyone in," Suzimo said to Linghu before crossing his legs and sitting on the stone bed, taking out spirit stones from his storage bag. The next day was Talisman Peak's face-off. Suzimo did not intend to spectate and instead focused on cultivating so that he could break through as soon as possible. Level 9 chi condensation was much harder than Suzimo had imagined. Of course, the biggest reason was because he had wasted too much time on Array Peak for the past half a year. In the last 2 months, he had spent most of his time cultivating sword wielding and sword formations. He did not have much time to raise his cultivation realm. Within his storage bag, there was a perfect spirit gathering elixir. He was almost done absorbing more than 2,000 inferior grade spirit stones. If he still could not break through to level 9 chi condensation, Suzimo would consume the spirit gathering elixir. The next morning, Shui and the other disciples of Weapon Peak arrived at Suzimo's cave abode early in the morning, wanting to invite him to Talisman Peak to watch the match. The Five Peaks face-off was only 5 days and it was the biggest event of the year in the sect. There were almost no trial disciples who would cultivate with all their might during these 5 days. Even if they did not know anything about talismans, it would be nice to watch the show. Of course, more importantly, the number 1 beauty of the Five Peaks, Lung Ro, would be participating in this year's Talisman Peak face-off. In fact, she might even get number 1 of Talisman Peak. Many disciples wanted to head over to catch a glimpse of the beauty. However, Shui and the others were stopped by Linghu and could not enter. After explaining to Linghu for a long time to no avail, they could only leave. Before long, little Fatty arrived as well. However, he could only leave after Linghu bared his teeth and growled. Suzimo was oblivious to everything that was happening outside. He was immersed in his cultivation until the 3rd day of the Five Peaks face-off. The 3rd day Elixir Peak face-off. This was also the 2nd battle between Suzimo and Feng Haoyu. Everyone knew that Feng Haoyu had lost a round in the Weapon Peak face-off. The fight today would definitely be even more intense and filled with gunpowder. Pushing open the door, Suzimo walked out of the cave. After a day and a night, the spirit stones in his storage bag were all used up. However, his cultivation base remained at the peak of level 8 chi condensation. Suzimo was in no hurry. He still had time. After the Elixir Peak face-off, he would return to cultivate and consume the spirit gathering elixir for another breakthrough. Early in the morning, many disciples had already gathered on Elixir Peak. In mid-air, there were constantly disciples flying over on their swords. Their clothes fluttered in the wind, making them look like graceful birds. Su Zimo had just reached Elixir Peak when he was blocked by Little Fatty. "Big brother, why didn't you come yesterday? Who got number 1? Su Zimo avoided the question and asked instead. Of course it was Sister Lung Ro. Little Fatty chuckled. That Li Liang from Talisman Peak wasn't a match for Sister Lung Ro at all, and was completely crushed. How exciting! Big brother, you didn't see how beautiful Sister Lung Ro was when she was creating talismans. What nonsense are you spouting? Right then, a jade-white palm appeared behind Little Fatty's head and knocked it with a moderate amount of force. Even though the person's tone was cold, there wasn't much blame in it. Su Zimo glanced sideways and met with a pair of cold eyes. A peerlessly beautiful woman with a chilling aura stood behind Little Fatty. It was Lung Ro, a disciple of Spirit Peak. Unexpectedly, Lung Ro nodded her head when she caught sight of Su Zimo. Slightly stunned, Su Zimo smiled and nodded in response. Even though both of them joined the sect at the same time, this was their first and only interaction. However, Su Zimo was surprised. Given Lung Ro's character, she would ignore anyone who greeted her. Even though Lung Ro did not say anything, her action was still surprising. In reality, after the Weapon Peak face-off, Su Zimo's number 1 had already changed the impression of many disciples of the 5 peaks. Or rather, they wanted to be on good terms with him. No cultivator would refuse to be friends with a weapon refinement master. Everyone saw how Little Fatty obtained an inferior-grade spirit weapon yesterday. Even though they did not say anything, they were extremely envious. Come, let me introduce you. Little Fatty's shifty gaze darted between Su Zimo and Lung Ro before sniggering. This is the number 1 of Talisman Peak, Sister Lung Ro. This is my big bro, number 1 of Weapon Peak, Su Zimo. Su Zimo and Lung Ro exchanged glances. Lung Ro averted her gaze while Su Zimo merely smiled with an indifferent expression. Little Fatty blinked and continued, "Don't just stand there. Both of you have your own strengths. You can interact more in the future." When he said interact, Little Fatty winked at Su Zimo with a weird tone. Su Zimo was fine with it, but Lung Ro seemed to have thought of something as a faint blush appeared on her face. It was extremely obvious on her snow-white skin. "Nonsense. You're asking for a beating." Lung Ro scolded softly and rapped Little Fatty on the head. Little Fatty sniggered. Right then, Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat as he sensed a sense of enmity. Instinctively, he turned over. Not far away, Feng Haoyu and the other Spirit Peak disciples arrived on their flying swords. When they saw Su Zimo and Lung Ro standing together in close proximity, many Spirit Peak disciples' eyes flashed with anger. Feng Haoyu's expression was calm and aloof as usual. However, his hands behind his back were clenched into fists. "Bro, other than Feng Haoyu, there's another disciple of Elixir Peak called Huashuan, who's your greatest opponent in this face-off. Don't underestimate him," Little Fatty said. "That person was the number 1 of Elixir Peak last year. I'm afraid he'll be even stronger this year." Su Zimo nodded. There were more than 200 disciples participating in Elixir Peak's face-off compared to Weapon Peak's. More than 200 trial disciples were gathered in the Elixir Refinement Hall, waiting for the time to arrive. Elixir Refinement was different from Weapon Refinement. In Weapon Peak's face-off, spirit weapons could be refined as one wished. However, in each Elixir Peak face-off, Elixir Peak's Peak Master would give out a specific elixir for the participating disciples to refine. At the end, the quality of the elixir would be judged. Therefore, before each Elixir Peak face-off, many disciples would guess what type of elixir they would be refining this time around. If they guessed correctly, they would have a much higher chance of winning in Elixir Peak's face-off by focusing on that type of elixir. Before long, all 5 Peak Masters arrived. The moment it was time, the brown-haired youth in the middle stood up and declared loudly, "For this Elixir Peak face-off, the elixir we're refining is..." At that point, the brown-haired youth paused for a moment. All the disciples outside the hall held their breaths and listened attentively. The brown-haired youth said slowly, "It's the Foundation Establishment elixir." The moment he said that, the crowd went into an uproar. The Foundation Establishment elixir was one of the hardest Grade 1 elixirs to refine. In the past Elixir Peak face-offs, there was a situation where the Foundation Establishment elixir was refined. However, all the participating disciples failed to form their elixirs, and that Elixir Peak face-off did not determine the number 1 of the competition. After that, in order to prevent such a situation from happening again, they stopped refining Foundation Establishment elixirs. To think that this year's Elixir Peak Face-Off would be competing for the Foundation Establishment elixir. Chapter 122. Many disciples in the hall frowned when they heard the words Foundation Establishment elixir. Everyone had guessed wrongly. There were very few disciples in the 5 peaks who would attempt to refine the Foundation Establishment elixir. The Foundation Establishment elixir required more than 10 types of materials, and the refinement process was way too complicated. Usually, only intermediate elixir refinement masters would have a higher chance of success. Among the 200-odd disciples, only Su Zimo, Feng Haoyu and the number 1 of Elixir Peak last year, Huishiyuan, were calm and not overly surprised. In that short period of time, cultivators had already begun to bring plates of spirit herbs to the front of the hall. The brown-haired youth said in a deep voice, "Everyone, come forward and pick a set of spirit herbs. You're not allowed to take more than that." Only a single set of spirit herbs meant that the difficulty had increased significantly. The Foundation Establishment elixir required more than 10 types of spirit herbs. As long as there was a mistake in the extraction of a single set, the ratio of the entire elixir would be wrong and the elixir would not be refined successfully. "Peak Master, isn't this way too difficult?" "That's right. If we're nervous during the extraction process and make a mistake, we won't have a chance anymore." Many disciples could not help but complain. The brown-haired youth said coldly, "The spirit herbs required for the Foundation Establishment elixir are rather ordinary and are grown in the sect. However, you guys should know that some elixirs require extremely rare spirit herbs, and you're extremely lucky to be able to obtain even a single one. There's only a single chance. If you fail in the refinement process, you can't blame anyone else but yourself for not being skilled enough." Everyone went silent. Feng Haoyu chuckled and went forward to pick a stalk of each of the spirit herbs, ready to refine the Foundation Establishment elixir. The second was Huishiyuan. Right after, the disciples went forward one after another to pick their own spirit herbs. Before long, the disciples returned to their original positions and took out their elixir furnaces, ready to go. Elixir Peak's face-off has officially begun. The brown-haired youth waved his hand. Spirit flames rose one after another in the hall. Su Zimo had not refined the Foundation Establishment elixir before. However, he was not unfamiliar with those spirit herbs. These spiritual grasses were the main spiritual materials for refining other medicinal pills. Su Zimo was in no hurry. Picking up a stalk of spirit herb in front of him, he closed his eyes and recalled. Su Zimo recalled the time when he was refining those pills, the temperature of the flame needed to refine the spirit grass, and every detail of the refining process. There was only a single chance. If he failed to extract a single spirit herb, it would mean that he would fail the Elixir Peak face-off. He could not afford to be careless. "Ah!" Just then, a disciple beside him exclaimed as he looked at the pile of ashes in his palm with a vexed expression. He had failed to refine the first spiritual grass. The temperature was too high, and the spiritual grass instantly turned into ashes. The disciple let out a long sigh, put away the cauldron and left the hall. Following that, another 2 disciples failed in their refinement and withdrew. A few people had already been eliminated during the extraction of the first herb. In reality, it wasn't that the disciples weren't skilled enough. It was because they were nervous when they saw that there was only a single stalk of herb. Coupled with the fact that this was Elixir Peak face-off, they lost their composure and made mistakes. After a short while, most of the disciples had extracted the first spiritual herb and placed the extracted essence into the cauldron. The first herb was definitely the one he was most familiar with, so it went smoothly. "What's Su Zimo doing? Is he asleep? I think he's just pretending to know when he doesn't. He's forcing himself here." When they saw that Su Zimo had yet to extract the spirit herb, mocking sounds could be heard from the crowd. It was only when the other disciples started to extract the second spirit herb that Su Zimo opened his eyes. Releasing his spirit fire, he placed the spirit herb on top of it and began to extract it. Before long, Su Zimo extracted a pinch of powder and placed it into the elixir furnace. Thereafter, he picked up the second spirit herb and closed his eyes to recall. A long time later, Su Zimo opened his eyes once more and extracted the second spirit herb. A few more disciples were eliminated during the extraction of the second spirit herb. Compared to Feng Haoyu and Huoshuan, Su Zimo's speed was extremely slow. However, there was no mistake at all. Each time he extracted the essence of the herb, it gave off a refreshing medicinal fragrance. As time passed by, more and more disciples were eliminated. By the time Su Zimo was done with the extraction of more than 10 spirit herbs, there were only slightly more than 80 disciples left. The third step of elixir refinement, fusion. There could not be any deviation in the ratio of spirit herb essences, or the elixir refinement would definitely fail. This step tested the weapon refinement master's rigor and meticulousness. After the fusion, it was the second extraction. This time round, the flames could be increased. Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu's level 3 spirit fires would play a huge role in this step. What was worth mentioning was that Huoshuan had cultivated a level 2 spirit fire, which was extremely rare as well. Feng Haoyu was the first to complete the fourth step, followed by Huoshuan. Because he spent too much time on the second extraction, Su Zimo was the slowest among the disciples. The fifth step, core formation. This step would reveal the quality of the elixir and determine who was superior. Initially, Feng Haoyu and Huoshuan would pay attention to Su Zimo's progress and situation from time to time. However, neither of them dared to be distracted when it came to core formation. It was dead silent outside the hall as well. Everyone held their breaths and looked at the two people who were in the midst of core formation. Bang! There was a crisp sound. A disciple failed core formation and his elixir exploded. He left the elixir refinement hall with a dejected expression and an indignant expression. Immediately after, a few more crisp sounds echoed from the hall. Bang! 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 A few more disciples failed core formation and the number of people in the hall decreased. Condense! A disciple hollered softly. Haha, it's done. That person roared in laughter. Just as he was about to put away the elixir to check its quality, a black smoke wafted out of the holes of the elixir furnace with a pungent smell. The brown-haired youth shook his head. The fact that the Foundation Establishment elixir was emitting that black smoke was no different from a poison elixir. Condense! Suddenly, Huoshuan hollered softly. Immediately after, a white smoke wafted out of the elixir furnace with a faint fragrance. Retrieve! An elixir flew out of the elixir furnace with a clear elixir pattern on it. It's an inferior grade Foundation Establishment elixir. Senior Brother Hua is amazing. He actually succeeded. Heaving a sigh of relief, Huoshuan looked towards Feng Haoyu instinctively. Condense! At the same time, Feng Haoyu was done with his core formation as well, and the fragrance he gave off seemed to be even richer. A pill flew out and floated in the air. It spun in the air, and on its surface there were two pill inscriptions. A middle-grade elixir. Huoshuan's eyes darkened as he sighed. He believed that he was definitely not weaker than Feng Haoyu in the first 3 steps of elixir refinement. It was only during the 4th step, secondary refinement, that his level 2 spirit fire could not compare to the thorough refinement of a level 3 spirit fire. That was the reason for the difference in quality of the elixir. Before long, the other disciples were done with their core formation as well. Even though there were more than 20 who succeeded, there were too many impurities in their elixirs and their quality was too poor without a grade. Right then, Su Zimo was done with his core formation, and an extremely rich medicinal fragrance wafted out. When the disciples outside the hall caught a whiff of it, they shuddered with intoxicated expressions and the spirit chi within their bodies rumbled. If the medicinal fragrance alone had such an effect, what grade was the elixir? The brown-haired youth's nose twitched and he sniffed carefully. His expression changed as he bolted upright with disbelief in his eyes, murmuring, "Could it be swash?" An elixir popped out of the elixir furnace and hovered in midair with 5 patterns on it. A perfect Foundation Establishment elixir. Chapter 123. Silence filled the hall as everyone looked at the Foundation Establishment elixir that was hovering in midair. Instinctively, everyone held their breaths as their gazes and minds were captivated by the elixir. The 5 patterns on the elixir looked so mysterious and perfect, as if it was the most beautiful picture in the world. 5 patterns, a perfect Foundation Establishment elixir. Even if an advanced elixir refinement master who could refine grade 3 elixirs was here, he would not dare to guarantee that he could refine a perfect Foundation Establishment elixir. Perfection meant that there was no flaw at all. This proved that in the entire process of refining pills, every step, every detail, every movement of the alchemist had reached perfection. With the foundation establishment elixir as such, even a chi refinement warrior with a pseudo-spirit root would have a chance of advancing to foundation establishment realm. At that moment, most of the disciples had even forgotten about the outcome of the match, and that this was Elixir Peak face-off. Their hearts were captivated by the elixir. It was only when Su Zimo kept the perfect foundation establishment elixir that the thousands of disciples sighed in unison. It was a spectacular sight. That single sigh contained way too many complicated emotions. There was disappointment, envy, jealousy, and respect. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. I thought that Su Zimo would have an even more intense fight in this Elixir Peak face-off. To think that it would be such a one-sided victory. The 5 Peak Masters nodded their heads secretly, not bothering to hide the admiration they had for Su Zimo in their eyes. Elixir and Weapon Peak, number 1 of 2 peaks. More importantly, the number 1 of Elixir and Weapon Peak this year was much stronger than before. For so many years, even the number 1 disciple of Weapon Peak's face-off had not managed to refine an inferior grade spirit weapon. For so many years, even the number 1 disciple of Elixir Peak's face-off had not managed to refine a simple elixir with 5 patterns. Compared to the other 4 major sects, Misty Peak was much weaker in terms of elixir and weapon refinement. In the sect competition that was held in the Great Zhou dynasty every 10 years, no one from Misty Peak had ever managed to leave their names on the elixir and weapon rankings. But this time the 5 Peak Masters saw hope in Su Zimo. Perhaps in the next sect competition, Su Zimo would really be able to leave his name on the alchemy and smithing rankings for Misty Peak and obtain unparalleled glory for the sect. Elixir Peak's Huashuan came before Su Zimo and chuckled bitterly. Cupping his fists, he said, "Junior brother Su, you're amazing. I admit my defeat wholeheartedly. I was just lucky." Su Zimo smiled modestly. At this moment, almost everyone's eyes fell on Su Zimo. A look of admiration flashed across Lung Ro's eyes. On the other side, Feng Haoyu suffered a crushing defeat. Yet he was unexpectedly very calm. His head was slightly lowered, and it was unknown what he was thinking. At the same time, Su Zimo felt an inexplicable sense of crisis. This sense of danger was faintly discernible. When he tried to sense it carefully, he couldn't find anything. Su Zimo frowned. This wasn't a good feeling. Ever since he entered the sect, Su Zimo had it easy. Even if Feng Haoyu was hostile towards him, it didn't bring him this sense of crisis. Su Zimo was expressionless as he swept his gaze across the 5 Peak Masters without noticing anything unusual. Thereafter, Su Zimo glanced sideways and swept his gaze across the crowd outside the hall. He didn't find anything either. Just now, that sense of crisis seemed to be a figment of his imagination. Right then, the brown-haired youth declared, "The results of Elixir Peak's face-off are out. I believe everyone can see that the number 1 of Elixir Peak is Weapon Peak's disciple, Su Zimo." Outside the hall, Little Fatty, Shui and the other Weapon Peak disciples cheered loudly. At this moment, every single Weapon Peak disciple felt as though their faces were shining. The disheveled old man sat on the spot and chuckled non-stop as well. "Su Zimo, follow me to the elixir chamber to pick an elixir." Su Zimo nodded. Under the envious gazes of many disciples, he left the elixir refinement hall with the brown-haired youth and headed to the elixir chamber. Even though the disciples outside the hall gradually dispersed, they were still discussing the competition today. After losing 2 rounds in a row, Feng Haoyu left the elixir refinement hall expressionlessly. "Senior brother Feng, there's no need to take a momentary loss to heart. After the Spirit Peak face-off, you'll still be able to teach that lad a lesson and regain your dignity." A Spirit Peak disciple consoled. Feng Haoyu smiled indifferently. At the end of the day, elixir and weapon refinement are unorthodox. I, Feng Haoyu, have never spent much effort on them. So what if I lost? It doesn't matter to me. That's right, senior brother Feng is right. Yes, so what if you're good at elixir and weapon refinement in the cultivation world? The moment you meet with danger, you'll still die. True strength is the only thing that matters. The many Spirit Peak disciples chimed in one after another. Not long after the Spirit Peak disciples left Elixir Peak, Feng Haoyu suddenly said, "You guys head back first. I need some time alone." Thinking that Feng Haoyu was in a bad mood, the disciples did not dare to say anything and left one after another. After everyone left, Feng Haoyu turned around slowly and looked in the direction of Spirit Elixir Hall. Suddenly, his calm gaze changed and exuded a chilling intent. On the other side, there were still some disciples on Elixir Peak who had not left and were discussing together. Feng Haoyu lost those 2 rounds terribly. It's a complete loss. That's right. Before the 5 peaks face-off, he even declared that he was going to get number 1 of 3 peaks. Now, Fufu, he's probably the only number 1 of Spirit Peak left. I heard that Su Zimo had no intention of taking part in the Elixir Peak face-off initially. It was Feng Haoyu who provoked him first and angered him. A disciple at the side shook his head. In my opinion, this might not be a good thing for Su Zimo. What do you mean? Someone asked. That's right. He's number 1 of 2 peaks. The rewards are secondary. What an honor this is. From this day forth, who in the sect doesn't know of Su Zimo's name? That person sneered when he heard that. Don't forget that Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu still have a fight after the 5 peaks face-off. At that point, many disciples were enlightened. Feng Haoyu was at perfected qi condensation while Su Zimo was only at level 8 qi condensation. The 2 of them were not on the same level at all. That person continued. Su Zimo won 2 rounds in a row and must have angered Feng Haoyu. In the final round, even if Su Zimo doesn't die, he'll definitely be skinned alive. As everyone was discussing, Su Zimo walked out of the Elixir Hall on the other side as well. This time round, Su Zimo chose a perfect spirit gathering elixir with 5 patterns in the Elixir Hall. Coupled with the other perfect spirit gathering elixir in his storage bag, he was confident that he could break through to level 9 qi condensation within the next 2 days. Su Zimo was about to leave when the brown-haired youth suddenly stopped him. After pondering for a moment, he asked, "How confident are you in your final battle with Feng Haoyu?" "I'm not confident," Su Zimo shook his head. "I've got a suggestion," the brown-haired youth said. "Now that you've already clinched the number 1 of 2 peaks, there's no need for you to spar with Feng Haoyu. It's fine even if you admit defeat. After all, there's no deep feud between fellow disciples." Su Zimo did not comment and merely nodded. "Yes, I'll consider this." "All right, you can head back." The brown-haired youth nodded. Chapter 124. Su Zimo had not flown far away from Elixir Peak on his sword when he caught sight of someone who seemed to have been waiting for him for a long time. "Su Zimo, I didn't think much of you initially. However, I have to admit that you've given me quite a pleasant surprise," Feng Haoyu said with a fake smile. Su Zimo paused for a moment and ignored him, about to leave on his sword. Feng Haoyu continued, "Right? There's something I have to remind you about." "Oh." Su Zimo did not turn back and merely asked, "You had better stay away from Lung Ro from now on. Otherwise." Feng Haoyu did not continue and his voice was chilling. Suddenly Su Zimo laughed. He was merely acquainted with Lung Ro. However, Su Zimo was extremely disgusted by Feng Haoyu's threatening tone. Su Zimo asked indifferently, "Otherwise what?" "Otherwise you'll die." There was no one else around them and Feng Haoyu had no qualms about concealing his killing intent. Su Zimo's back was facing Feng Haoyu as he narrowed his eyes. He had indeed sensed Feng Haoyu's killing intent for a moment earlier on. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he chuckled. "In Misty Peak, fellow sect members are not allowed to kill each other. You're no exception." "Fufu, it's fine," Feng Haoyu said leisurely. "As long as you're in the sect, I'll play with you until you die." Su Zimo turned around slowly and looked at Feng Haoyu quietly, saying expressionlessly, "Do you believe that I'll kill you right now?" For some reason, Feng Haoyu felt a chill run down his spine when he was stared at by Su Zimo. It felt as though he was being targeted by an extremely ferocious ancient demon beast that could rip him to shreds at any moment. Frowning, Feng Haoyu dispelled that strange feeling in his heart. After all, Su Zimo was only at the 8th level of qi condensation. He posed no threat to him. When he saw Feng Haoyu not answering, Su Zimo turned around and left, and it wasn't long before he vanished from Feng Haoyu's field of vision. When Su Zimo returned to his cave abode, he suddenly stopped in his tracks and fell into deep thought with a flicker in his eyes. Su Zimo gradually sensed that something was amiss. Before this, Feng Haoyu indeed had great enmity towards him. However, after the two face-offs of Weapon and Elixir Peak, that hostility had turned into killing intent. It seemed normal, but it was a little inexplicable. There was no deep grudge between fellow sect members. Even if there was competition, there was no need for Feng Haoyu to kill him. Just now, Feng Haoyu told him to stay away from Lung Ro. It was only after saying that Feng Haoyu revealed his killing intent. Although it seemed logical, it felt like he was trying to cover it up. If Feng Haoyu's motive for killing him wasn't because of Lung Ro or the two Weapon Peak face-offs, what was it? What was Feng Haoyu hiding? Or perhaps I'm thinking too much. And Feng Haoyu is merely an arrogant and narrow-minded person? Su Zimo shook his head. He had a feeling that Feng Haoyu wasn't that simple. After pondering for a while, Su Zimo entered his cave abode and continued cultivating in seclusion. Tomorrow was the Array Peak face-off. The location of the Array Peak face-off was the 10 Formations Pagoda. It was a competition to see who could clear the most levels in the shortest amount of time. Su Zimo had no intention of participating. Firstly, Su Zimo did not have much time and had to spend it on raising his cultivation. Secondly, even though challenging the 10 Formations Pagoda did not expend much spirit chi, it was way too taxing on one's mental state and energy. He might not be able to recover even after resting for a day or two. Su Zimo had to do his best to prepare for his battle with Feng Haoyu 2 days later. On the other side, Feng Haoyu had just arrived at his cave abode when a hoarse voice rang in his ears. It was hard to tell if it was a male or female. Feng Haoyu, you've said too much to that lad. The voice sounded sinister and deep, sending chills down one's spine. Feng Haoyu spun around but could not find any trace of the person. You don't have to be suspicious. The reason why I'm here is naturally because I know of your identity. I'm just reminding you to be careful and not expose yourself. Don't forget your mission as well. The voice sounded once more, drifting erratically. When he heard that, Feng Haoyu heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. Senior, you're worrying too much. I intentionally hinted to him to stay away from Lung Ro earlier on. Su Zimo must have thought that I wanted to kill him because of Lung Ro. Don't underestimate anyone. Yes, Feng Haoyu nodded obediently. Su Zimo is a latent danger. He must die and not be left alive. Feng Haoyu lowered his head and said deeply, Don't worry, Senior. Leave this to me. May I know your identity in Misty Peak, Senior? Pausing for a moment, Feng Haoyu asked. You don't have to know for now. If there's a need, I'll naturally tell you. Yes. After a moment, the voice did not sound again. Feng Haoyu knew that the person had left. Tidying his robes, Feng Haoyu looked around before entering his cave abode. 4th day Array Peak face-off. Every year, there were not many disciples watching the Array Peak face-off. After all, it was a competition to clear the 10 Formations Pagoda. Before this, there was already a record on the 10 Formation Stele and everyone knew who the number 1 of Array Peak was. However, it was different this year. 3 months ago, a mysterious challenger appeared out of nowhere and broke the best record in the history of the 10 Formations Stele. Furthermore, he did it all the way. Cleared level 10 of the 10 Formations Pagoda. Took 7 days and 18 hours. That line of words was on the first row of the 10 Formations Stele and was extremely eye-catching. However, the place for the name was blank. Out of curiosity, everyone wanted to know the identity of the mysterious challenger. To many disciples, the most likely reason why this person was hiding his identity was because he wanted to shock everyone at the end of the year face-off. Therefore, many trial disciples had already gathered at Array Peak early in the morning, wanting to catch a glimpse of this person's face. The 5 Peak Masters had arrived early as well, sitting in a row and chatting casually. Xianyi, you're still not saying anything at this point? When Xian asked with a smile. The brown-haired youth urged as well, that's right. Since we're going to find out today, you should tell us beforehand so that we're prepared. Sweeping his gaze across the crowd, Xianyi did not catch sight of Su Zimo. After pondering for a moment, he shook his head. Forget it, you guys should see for yourselves. Since Su Zimo did not choose to announce it, Xianyi did not intend to reveal it either. Arriving before the 10 Formations Stele, Zhongliang looked at the words on the first row with a conflicted expression. Are you finally going to reveal yourself today? Zhongliang murmured softly. Let me see who you are so that I can accept my defeat. Before long, the Array Peak face-off began. Many challengers entered the 10 Formations pagoda together. Everyone outside was waiting for someone to walk up to the 10 Formation stele and place their sect badge on it. As long as that person appeared, he would be the true number 1 of Array Peak even without participating in the face-off. At that moment, Su Zimo was in seclusion in his cave abode, trying to break through to level 9 Qi condensation. Chapter 125. Time passed by quickly, and in the blink of an eye, a day had passed. The light of the 10 Formations pagoda's formation patterns shone continuously throughout the day. The first row of the 10 Formation stele was empty with no words appearing at all. By the time the last person was teleported out, the first row of the 10 Formation stele was still the same. Let alone the many trial disciples gathered at Array Peak. Even the 4 Peak Masters looked disappointed. Just who is that person? Why hasn't he appeared yet? Does that person really think that fame is nothing but dust? The curiosity of many disciples towards the mysterious challenger had reached its limits, and they were panicking. Xianyi stood up and declared loudly, "The Array Peak face-off is over. The number 1 of Array Peak this time round is disciple Zhong Liang." There were scattered cheers from the crowd that weren't enthusiastic. Everyone knew that the reason why Zhong Liang was number 1 was because the mysterious challenger had yet to appear. At that moment, Zhong Liang looked at the 10 Formation stele with a bitter smile. The title of number 1 of Array Peak this year was probably the least convincing one if it was given to him. The 5 Peak Masters were the first to leave. In midair, when Xian was still indignant as he asked, "Xianyi, stop keeping us in suspense. Just who is that lad?" Smiling without replying, Xianyi pondered for a moment before changing the topic. After the 5 Peaks face-off, Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu will be fighting. Where will it be held? What are your plans? The location doesn't matter. The outcome will be the same. When Xian replied indifferently, Xianyi shook his head. This is a battle that everyone will be watching. In the sect, it's probably not inferior to the 5 Peaks face-off. It's better to be careful. Since Su Zimo is forbidden from entering Spirit Peak, we can't use Spirit Peak's Spirit Arena. Su Zimo is a disciple of Weapon Peak after all, and it's not appropriate for him to be on Weapon Peak as well. What's left is to choose from the Spirit Arenas of Talisman, Array and Elixir Peak, the brown-haired youth said. Suddenly Xianyi said, "Let's do it on Array Peak." Alright, when Xian nodded. The other Peak Masters had no objections and the matter was settled. Every year, Spirit Peak's face-off would be held on the last day. It was also the most important event for the sect and all cultivators. Regardless of how good one was at setting up formations, crafting talismans, refining pills, or forging weapons, the ultimate goal of all of these was to increase the strength of a cultivator. In the cultivation world, the strong preyed on the weak, and strength reigned supreme. The degree of cruelty was even greater than the mountains and forests where ferocious beasts roamed. This was also the reason why Dai Yu had allowed Su Zimo to live in Songlang mountain range for a year. However, Su Zimo had just stepped into the cultivation world and had not really gone out to explore, so he had not experienced the dangers of the cultivation world. The 5th day Spirit Peak face-off. Virtually all of the disciples of the 5 Peaks were present, as were many of the inner sect disciples who had been in secluded meditation. There were even a few sect elders who had come to watch. The rules of Spirit Peak's face-off were simple. Disciples of the sect would step forward to draw lots and fight in pairs. The final victor would be the number 1 of Spirit Peak. Although Feng Haoyu had lost 2 consecutive matches in the Weapon Peak face-off and Elixir Peak face-off. However, in Spirit Peak's face-off, Feng Haoyu was still the most popular and was the disciple that the 5 Peak Masters had the highest hopes for. In the process of fighting with his opponent, Feng Haoyu had indeed displayed the strength that he should have. Right from the start, he had a winning streak and no one was able to pose much of an obstacle to him. Many trial disciples had heard that Feng Haoyu had already cultivated one of the 3 secret skills of the sect, Ethereal Sword, and wanted to witness his glory at Spirit Peak's face-off. However, Feng Haoyu had not used that secret skill the entire time. Apart from Feng Haoyu, Lung Ro's performance had taken everyone by surprise as well. Even though she did not have an inferior grade spirit weapon, Lung Ro managed to defeat many strong opponents of Spirit Peak, using her sword-wielding technique as a foundation and coupled with many talismans. Lung Ro's flying sword carried a bone-chilling intent. If one was not careful, the flying sword would be covered in a layer of frost upon collision, and its agility would be greatly reduced. Of course, the one that surprised everyone the most was Little Fatty. Little Fatty was only at level 9 chi condensation, and did not have much of an advantage in terms of sword-wielding technique. However, with the help of the inferior-grade gigantic axe spirit weapon gifted by Su Zimo, and his powerful body-tempering technique, Little Fatty managed to defeat many perfected chi refinement warriors consecutively. The final battle was still between Feng Haoyu and Lung Ro. Even though Lung Ro's talismans were endless and ever-changing, Feng Haoyu's sword-wielding technique was superior. With the help of wind elemental spirit chi, the flying sword in Feng Haoyu's hands became even more graceful and agile, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. It was an eye-opener for everyone. Spirit Peak's face-off ended before sunset. As expected, Feng Haoyu was the number 1 of Spirit Peak. Lung Ro was in 2nd place. Little Fatty was in 3rd place. The reward for the number 1 of Spirit Peak was also the most generous. Not only were they rewarded with many spirit stones and sect contribution points, they could even choose an elixir from the elixir chamber, an inferior grade spirit weapon from the spirit weapon chamber, and a grade 1 talisman from the talisman chamber. Seems like someone's going to be crushed in the battle between senior brother Feng and Su Zimo tomorrow. That's right. Even Lung Ro and senior brother Li, who were at perfected chi condensation, lost to senior brother Feng. Su Zimo, who is at level 8 chi condensation, is truly not enough. After the Spirit Peak face-off, no one thought highly of Su Zimo. It was way too easy for Feng Haoyu to clinch the number 1 of Spirit Peak. He didn't even use his full strength. The brown-haired youth laughed. Wen Xian could not conceal the glee in his eyes as he nodded. I'm a good judge of character. If that wasn't the case, I wouldn't have begged the patriarch to let Haoyu cultivate the sect's secret skill in advance. To be fair, Feng Haoyu, who possesses a wind spirit root, is indeed the best candidate to cultivate ethereal sword. The cold youth nodded. Wen Xian smiled. Before this battle, I told Haoyu that if you use the sect's secret skill to defeat your seniors, you would have lost even if you clinched the number 1 of Spirit Peak and wouldn't be able to convince the masses. Not bad, Haoyu. He did not disappoint me. The disheveled old man remained silent with a hint of worry in his eyes. The stronger Feng Haoyu was, the worse Su Zimo would be defeated the next day. As his beloved disciple, he could not bear to see Su Zimo suffer such a blow. Wen Xian, give me some face. How about you tell Feng Haoyu to forget about tomorrow's battle? After hesitating for a long time, the disheveled old man suddenly said. Given the disheveled old man's status, it was already not easy for him to plead for a disciple. Xianyi, the brown-haired youth, and the cold youth remained silent. It was not appropriate for them to interfere in such matters. After a moment of silence, Wen Xian said, the arrow is already on the bow and has to be released. I can't step in for this matter. But, the disheveled old man was about to continue persuading when Wen Xian frowned and interrupted him with a flick of his sleeves. Su Zimo won 2 rounds against Haoyu in a row. And Haoyu can't even win a single round against him? Your disciple is a disciple, but mine isn't? With that said, Wen Xian left first, leaving the other 4 where they were. The disheveled old man sighed awkwardly. The brown-haired youth coughed gently. Don't blame him. Wen Xian has poured too much effort into Feng Haoyu. Even though Wen Xian didn't say anything about it after Feng Haoyu lost 2 rounds in a row, I'm sure he's unhappy about it. It's only normal. Xianyi patted the disheveled old man on the shoulder as well and consoled. It's fine. It's good for Su Zimo to suffer some setbacks. His future achievements might not be weaker than Feng Haoyu's. The road is still long. Xianyi's eyes flickered as he said meaningfully. Chapter 126. For the past 2 days, Su Zimo had not appeared at all and had been in seclusion in his cave abode, attempting to break through to level 9 chi condensation. On the night of the Spirit Peak face-off, Su Zimo consumed his 2nd spirit gathering elixir. Su Zimo's body seemed to have turned into a vortex as spirit chi surged endlessly into his body through his right hand, gushing towards his dantian. The spirit chi in Su Zimo's dantian expanded endlessly like an ocean. After an unknown period of time, Su Zimo shuddered and opened his eyes. In the darkness, 2 divine lights shone brightly before disappearing. Level 9 Qi Condensation. After joining the sect for less than a year, Su Zimo had finally reached level 9 Qi Condensation. Even in the entire cultivation world, that cultivation speed was not considered slow. At that moment, Su Zimo sensed the changes in his dantian carefully with a puzzled expression. According to the Qi Condensation Manual, level 10 Qi Condensation, also known as perfected Qi Condensation, would cause a quantitative change in the spirit Qi in the dantian. In other words, a sea of Qi would form in the dantian. That was also the reason why it took more time and resources to advance from level 9 Qi Condensation to perfected Qi Condensation, as well as the difficulty of breaking through. But now, Su Zimo had just advanced to level 9 Qi Condensation, and a vast sea of Qi had formed in his dantian. This was completely different from the introduction of the Qi Condensation Manual. This meant that Su Zimo at level 9 Qi Condensation would not be weaker than Feng Haoyu at perfected Qi Condensation in terms of spirit Qi. Su Zimo smiled and was suddenly filled with anticipation and confidence for the battle tomorrow. The next morning, when Su Zimo walked out of his cave abode, there were already many cultivators waiting outside for him to come out of seclusion. They were Little Fatty, Shui, and many other weapon peak disciples. Bro, you're finally out. Bro, you're already at level 9 Qi Condensation? Little Fatty's eyes lit up. Su Zimo smiled and nodded. The number 1 of Spirit Peak this time round is Feng Haoyu? Su Zimo asked. Everyone nodded. Recalling Feng Haoyu's performance yesterday, everyone's expression was somewhat solemn. Their gazes towards Su Zimo revealed a trace of worry. In their hearts, even if Su Zimo had stepped into the 9th level of Qi Condensation, the gap between him and Feng Haoyu was just too great. Little Fatty whispered, during the Spirit Peak face-off yesterday, Feng Haoyu did not even use his sex secret skill to obtain number 1. It's clear that he did not use his full strength. Big brother, you should be more careful today. Oh, so powerful. Su Zimo laughed. Shui also smiled and said, Junior brother Su, don't feel any pressure in this battle. Just give it your all. If you lose, so be it. After all, you are already number 1 in 2 peaks. That's right. It doesn't matter even if that Feng Haoyu wins against you. Us disciples of Weapon Peak aren't good at fighting in the first place. It's not embarrassing even if we lose. Su Zimo smiled and asked, where is the location of today's battle? Array Peak Spirit Arena. Little Fatty replied. Array Peak, is it? Su Zimo murmured softly as a strange look flashed through his eyes. Ever since he left Array Peak 3 months ago, he had not returned. Sensing Su Zimo's strange expression, Little Fatty was worried and asked hurriedly, what's wrong, bro? Is there anything wrong with Array Peak? Nothing. Su Zimo shook his head and did not explain, waving his hand. Let's go. I'll go test out the capabilities of the number 1 of Spirit Peak. It had only been a day and many disciples had gathered on Array Peak once more. Other than the trial disciples of the 5 peaks, some inner sect disciples had also rushed over to watch the show. Chun Yu of the disciplinary hall, who had a grudge with Su Zimo, was among them. The 5 peak masters were all present. Array Peak Spirit Arena was right beside the 10 Formations Pagoda and the 10 Formations Steel. Feng Haoyu had arrived early and stood on the Spirit Arena with his hands behind his back with a proud expression. Before long, Su Zimo and the others arrived on their flying swords and arrived before the Spirit Arena. Su Zimo's appearance attracted countless gazes. Fufu, I was wondering why I hadn't seen him for the past 2 days. So he's been cultivating in seclusion. To think that he's already at level 9 Qi Condensation. The disciple who spoke did not sound too surprised. Instead, there was a hint of mockery in his tone. So what if he's at level 9 Qi Condensation? He's just asking to be humiliated. I bet that Su Zimo will definitely lose within 3 moves. Forget it. If senior brother Feng goes all out, Su Zimo won't even be able to withstand a single move. There was a lot of discussion in the crowd, and it was very noisy. Even though Su Zimo had obtained the number 1 of Weapon and Elixir Peak, it did not mean that he was strong. Nobody thought highly of Su Zimo in this battle. Many Spirit Peak disciples were even waiting to see Su Zimo make a fool of himself. Under countless mocking gazes, Su Zimo ascended the Spirit Arena. Right from the beginning, Su Zimo's expression was extremely calm and his eyes were clear like an ancient well. Hey Su Zimo, if you kneel down and beg for mercy right now, Senior brother Feng might be soft-hearted and let you off this once. In the crowd, Sun Tao, the Spirit Peak disciple who was knocked out by Su Zimo previously, shouted, causing a wave of laughter. Su Zimo glanced sideways and merely looked at Sun Tao indifferently. Why? Do you think that you didn't embarrass yourself enough the previous time? That incident had always been Sun Tao's humiliation. Now that Su Zimo was bringing it up in front of everyone, Sun Tao's face flushed red and green. Gritting his teeth, he barked coldly, Su Zimo, I haven't settled the score with you for the previous incident. You were the one who ambushed me first and yet you're still showing off here shamelessly. Showing off? Su Zimo chuckled and shook his head. What's there to show off about defeating you? Everyone could hear the casual and disdainful tone in Su Zimo's voice. Instantly, Sun Tao's eyes reddened and he could not help but holler. Su Zimo, fight me fairly if you have the guts. I'll show you what I'm capable of. Right then, little fatty sneered, if you want to fight, sure. I'll fight with you. Instantly, Sun Tao withered. Little fatty's strength was clear for all to see in this Spirit Peak face-off. Sun Tao was no match for him. Alright, there's no need to say anything else. Feng Haoyu, Su Zimo, the two of you can begin. Right then when Xian hollered softly, suppressing the voices of the crowd. In the spirit arena, Feng Haoyu looked at Su Zimo with a disdainful gaze as he sneered. Su Zimo, junior brother son is right. If you beg me right now, I can consider sparing you this once. But if we really fight, don't blame me for being merciless. When he heard that, the disheveled old man frowned and could not help but shout, don't overdo it in a spar between fellow disciples. Don't endanger one's life. Feng Haoyu smiled. Don't worry, Peak Master. I'll teach junior brother Su properly what immortal cultivation methods are. The moment he said that, Feng Haoyu patted his storage bag and summoned an inferior-grade flying sword. Without anyone seeing how Feng Haoyu controlled it, the flying sword shuttled around him and danced in the air, displaying an extremely profound sword manipulation technique. At the same time, Su Zimo withdrew a flying sword from his storage bag as well. Everyone focused their attention. It was an inferior-grade flying sword as well. That must be the reward for being the number one of Weapon Peak. Yes, the number one of Weapon Peak can choose an inferior-grade spirit weapon from the spirit weapon chamber. Seems like it's this flying sword. Junior brother Su isn't rational enough. If it were me, I would definitely choose a defensive spirit weapon. Feng Haoyu pointed at Su Zimo's flying sword and chuckled. Do you think that you're qualified to fight me with just an inferior-grade flying sword? You're wrong. Su Zimo replied indifferently. It's not just one. The moment he said that, two more flying swords appeared in Su Zimo's palms. Chapter 127. The crowd was in an uproar when they saw the three flying swords in Su Zimo's palms. If they were ordinary flying swords, they might not have attracted everyone's surprise. However, these were three inferior-grade flying swords. Even if Su Zimo was rewarded with an inferior-grade spirit weapon for being the number one of Weapon Peak, what about the other two? Even disciples of Spirit Peak who were known for their combat strength did not have inferior-grade spirit weapons. Su Zimo had just joined the sect for less than a year and yet, he had already taken out three of them? The many trial disciples below were envious. Peak Master is way too biased. Why should he be rewarded with three inferior-grade spirit weapons? Maybe it's because Su Zimo was the number one of 2 peaks this year. So what if he's the number one of 2 peaks? There's no such rule in the sect. That's right. Can't he just give us one? I've been in the sect for 2 years now, and I haven't even gotten an inferior-grade spirit weapon. Not to mention the disciples below. Even the 5 peak masters were taken aback. Xian Yi's heart skipped a beat as a glint flashed through his eyes. Could that lad have already mastered the tripartite sword formation? Xian Yi thought about it again. Impossible. The time is too short. How is that possible? When he heard the discussions below, when Xian frowned and glanced sideways at the disheveled old man beside him. Sensing Wen Xian's gaze, the disheveled old man harumphed softly. You can't be thinking that I gave those 3 flying swords to Su Zimo as well, right? Suddenly the brown-haired youth said, the 3 flying swords are almost identical in size and shape. They should have been created by the same weapon refinement master. There aren't 3 flying swords that are almost identical in the spirit weapon chamber. In other words, those 3 flying swords were created by Su Zimo himself? Lung Yi raised her brow in surprise. Xian Yi nodded. That should be the case. Given perfected being Jin Dan's vision, he could tell that Su Zimo's 3 flying swords were identical and could not have been taken from the spirit weapon chamber. The brown-haired youth chuckled. No wonder that lad crafted an inferior-grade gigantic axe for little Fatty of Spirit Peak during the face-off back then. So he already has 3 flying swords. I have to say, this kid's attainments in weapon refinement are indeed extraordinary. In less than a year, he was actually able to forge 3 low-grade spiritual weapons. It seems that his unique spirit gathering technique is still somewhat useful. In the spirit arena, Feng Haoyu was slightly stunned when he saw Su Zimo's 3 flying swords. Surprise flashed in his eyes before it turned into mockery as he could not help but laugh. Su Zimo, oh Su Zimo, do you think you can fight me just because you have 3 flying swords? You can try. Su Zimo said indifferently. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 3 flying swords floated in front of Su Zimo. Their bodies trembled slightly, and the sound of swords hummed incessantly. All right. Feng Haoyu's eyes lit up as he hollered, Today, I'll show you what true strength is. Go. Standing on the spot without moving, Feng Haoyu waved his hand and a stream of spirit qi entered the flying swords. The spirit patterns on the swords shone brightly. Swoosh. Turning into a streak of light, the flying swords pierced towards Su Zimo's head at an extremely fast speed. Before the swords arrived, they were already chilling. Su Zimo's heart skipped a beat. In a certain sense, this was the first time he had used immortal cultivation methods to fight after entering the cultivation world. Feng Haoyu's swords were faster and more unpredictable than Su Zimo had imagined. Su Zimo's expression was unchanged as he split into 2 flying swords to block the incoming flying swords while controlling the third to charge towards Feng Haoyu. Feng Haoyu narrowed his eyes. He had not expected that not only would Su Zimo not defend with all his might, he would even retaliate. You must have a death wish. Pointing his finger into the distance, Feng Haoyu hollered softly, Go. The flying swords that were initially speeding in midair shone brightly and increased in speed, breaking through the defense of Su Zimo's 2 flying swords and arriving before him instantly. In the blink of an eye, the 2 flying swords that Su Zimo had intercepted had become mere decorations. Great! Many disciples below could not help but exclaim when they saw that. The flying swords were right in front of them with a chilling sword qi and a bedazzling sword beam. If it was any other ordinary qi refinement warrior, they would have been scared out of their wits. However, Su Zimo was not flustered at all. Shifting his feet slightly, he managed to dodge Feng Haoyu's attack by a hair's breadth. The flying swords brushed past Su Zimo, but they did not hurt him at all. When they saw that, the eyes of the 5-peaked masters lit up as they nodded secretly. Feng Haoyu had not expected that Su Zimo would be able to dodge that attack. At the same time, Su Zimo's 3rd flying sword had already arrived before Feng Haoyu. As Feng Haoyu turned his flying sword, he took out a silver shield from his storage bag. Injecting spirit qi into it, it expanded against the wind and blocked in front of him. Clang! The flying sword collided with the shield and let out an ear-piercing sound. That shield was a reward that Feng Haoyu chose from the spirit weapon chamber of Weapon Peak, after he clinched the number 1 spot of Spirit Peak. Su Zimo's other 2 flying swords circled around Feng Haoyu's flying sword and clashed repeatedly with it, causing sparks to fly everywhere with sword qi. For a moment, Feng Haoyu's flying sword was restricted by Su Zimo's 2 flying swords and could not break through the obstruction. On the other side, Su Zimo's 3rd flying sword was attacking Feng Haoyu relentlessly. As for Feng Haoyu, he could only defend passively. When they saw that, all the disciples present were dumbfounded with disbelief in their eyes. The battle situation before them was completely different from what they had expected. In their minds, the difference in strength between the 2 of them was so great that victory would be decided within 3 rounds at most. But now, Feng Haoyu was disadvantaged and could only defend passively after the exchange. Su Zimo, who had 3 inferior-grade flying swords, coupled with his proficient sword-wielding technique, was able to restrict Feng Haoyu's performance completely. That doesn't make sense. Su Zimo is only at level 9 qi condensation. Even with 2 flying swords, there's no way he can take on senior brother Feng head-on. Why do I feel that their strength is about the same? The disciples below frowned in confusion. Little Fatty was the only one who vaguely knew about Suzimo's background. Back when the two of them sparred in the cave abode, Suzimo was able to match him at level 8 Qi condensation despite being at level 7 Qi condensation. Based on that logic, even though Suzimo was a level lower than Feng Haoyu, they should be evenly matched. When they saw that, the 5 peak masters naturally had different expressions. The disheveled old man was pleasantly surprised and invigorated. However, Spirit Peak's master Wen Xian frowned. Given perfected being Jin Dan's judgment, he could naturally tell that Suzimo's sword-wielding technique was no weaker than most of the disciples of Spirit Peak. Coupled with the help of 3 inferior-grade flying swords, his strength had increased as well. Of course, the 5 peak masters could not understand how Suzimo, who was at level 9 Qi condensation, could take on Feng Haoyu who was at perfected Qi condensation without being disadvantaged. The 3 flying swords clashed repeatedly beside Suzimo. Feng Haoyu's flying sword was clearly more agile and elegant. However, it could not reach Suzimo under the restriction of 2 flying swords. On the other hand, Suzimo's 3rd flying sword circled Feng Haoyu and attacked him continuously. Feng Haoyu could only rely on his inferior-grade shield to block, and was unable to retaliate. Instead, he looked wretched. The battle had entered a stalemate. Chapter 128. It had to be said that Suzimo had truly brought them too many surprises. Based on the strength that Suzimo had displayed, he would definitely be in the top 3 if he were to take part in the Spirit Peak face-off. If senior brother Feng were to use his full strength, Suzimo would be defeated instantly. Yes, Suzimo is able to force senior brother Feng to this extent. It's not embarrassing for him to lose. The disciples below discussed fervently while Feng Haoyu was even more enraged in the spirit arena. The situation this time round was completely out of his expectations. Suzimo was only at level 9 Qi condensation. However, he could not gain the upper hand in the clash of their flying swords. This meant that if Suzimo was at perfected Qi condensation, there was a high chance that he would surpass him in terms of strength. This could not carry on. Waving the shield in his hands, Feng Haoyu deflected the incoming flying sword. Suddenly, he withdrew a talisman from his storage bag and injected spirit qi. Whoosh! Suddenly, the talisman shone with a bedazzling spirit light. Senior brother Feng is using a talisman. That seems to be an offensive talisman with quite a bit of power. Let's see how Suzimo is going to defend against it this time round. Feng Haoyu tossed the talisman in Suzimo's direction. The talisman exploded. The scattered talisman shards stirred the surrounding spirit qi in midair and instantly, a bedazzling electric light was formed. Thunderfall talisman. A series of exclamations sounded from below the arena. Thunder-type spirit arts were the strongest and most ferocious among all spirit arts, repelling all evil. That Thunderfall talisman was naturally the one with the greatest lethality among Grade 1 talismans. It was also Feng Haoyu's reward for being number 1 of Spirit Peak. Now that he had to use it, Feng Haoyu could not help but reveal a pained expression. When he saw Feng Haoyu summon the Thunderfall talisman, the disheveled old man's expression changed and he could not help but glare at Wen Xian. This disciple of yours sure has a lot of treasures. Talismans are a form of strength as well. It's normal, Wen Xian replied indifferently. He's lost. The lightning talisman has been used. The outcome has been decided. Even senior brother Feng would have to use his full strength when facing the lightning talisman. Let's see how Suzimo will block it. Hehe. Just as the disciples were discussing, there was an explosion in the air above the spirit arena. Crack! A bolt of lightning as thick as an arm suddenly descended, heading straight for Suzimo at an extremely fast speed. The instant Feng Haoyu took out the talisman, Suzimo already felt that something was amiss and hurriedly withdrew the 3rd flying sword. Suzimo was very calm. At the same time the talisman exploded, he waved his hands, and the 3 flying swords suddenly shuttled back and forth in the air, leaving behind sword marks. Finally they connected head to tail, forming a triangular sword array. Wang! Just below the flickering lightning, a ball of dazzling light burst forth illuminating the void. The light of the formation pattern. In the air above the spirit arena, the light of a formation pattern actually appeared. What's going on? Why is there a formation here? Did someone set it up beforehand? No, that formation pattern light seems to have been activated by Su Zimo's 3 flying swords. The crowd exclaimed in surprise. They were confused as they did not know what was happening in the spirit arena. However, the 5 peak masters shuddered and their expressions changed starkly. Even though Xianyi was mentally prepared, he could not help but feel emotional when he saw it with his own eyes as he exclaimed repeatedly, "Good, good, good. There's finally a successor for our sex sword formation master." The disheveled old man burst into laughter as well. "Xianyi, you've been nurturing my disciple into a sword formation master in secret. Not bad, not bad." As perfected Jin Dan, he naturally knew that there was no way Su Zimo could have become a sword formation master without Xianyi's guidance. Frowning when Xian remained silent. Sword formation master? Most of the disciples below were unfamiliar with that title. The Array Peak disciples were the only ones who could not help but be shocked when they heard that. They could not help but exclaim, "Su Zimo is a sword formation master? So what if he's a sword formation master? What's the big deal?" A Spirit Peak disciple scoffed. Before he finished his sentence, the lightning bolt from the skies collided with the triangular sword formation with a deafening boom. Sparks flew everywhere and the airflow was chaotic. Against the blinding lightning, Su Zimo spread his legs slightly apart. With a cold expression, he controlled the sword formation with both hands and his black hair billowed. He was like an immovable god. "Ah, he's fine." Many disciples were dumbfounded and their eyeballs nearly popped out. Against the power of the lightning talisman, Su Zimo had managed to defend against it completely with the formation formed by his 3 flying swords and was completely unharmed. A disciple was secretly shocked. "Is a sword formation master that strong? What sword formation is that?" Someone could not help but ask. "If I'm not wrong, that should be the tripartite sword formation of our sect." Zhongliang of Array Peak said deeply. "What's the tripartite sword formation?" Someone asked. Zhongliang explained. The so-called tripartite refers to the 3 elements of heaven, earth and man. With the 3 flying swords as the foundation, they are connected head to tail to form the tripartite sword formation. The head is the tail and the tail is the head. Every single corner of the sword formation has a sharp edge that can be used for both offense and defense. If Su Zimo's strength increased by controlling the 3 flying swords, then the sword formation formed by the 3 flying swords would cause the power of the 3 flying swords to converge and increase exponentially. The situation changed instantly. Initially, everyone thought that Feng Haoyu would definitely win with the lightning talisman. To think that Su Zimo would be able to defend against the impact of the thunderbolt with the tripartite sword formation. When Lung Ro saw that from below, she lamented internally, "If I were to fight against junior brother Su, I might not be able to break through the defense of his sword formation." In the spirit arena, when he saw that Su Zimo was able to defend against the lightning talisman, a look of surprise flashed through Feng Haoyu's eyes. Right then, Su Zimo controlled the tripartite sword formation with both hands and pointed forward, hollering softly, "Go!" A triangular sword formation tore through the voids with a chilling aura, speeding towards Feng Haoyu with a blinding sword beam. Hurriedly, Feng Haoyu retracted his flying swords and blocked in front of the tripartite sword formation. Clang! The sound of metal clashing echoed when the flying swords collided with the sword formation. Instantly, Feng Haoyu's flying swords were sent flying. However, the tripartite sword formation merely paused for a moment before colliding heavily against the silver shield in front of Feng Haoyu. Boom! There was a loud bang and Feng Haoyu shuddered. He could not help but stagger a few steps back as he tasted a sweetness in his throat and blood flowed out from the corner of his lips. He was injured. Even in the face-off, Feng Haoyu was not injured against the many experts of Spirit Peak. But now, he was injured against a disciple of Weapon Peak, who was of a lower cultivation realm than him. Su Zimo's eyes shone brightly as he controlled the tripartite sword formation from afar. The sword hummed continuously in midair as it trembled and its sword chi surged, ready to unleash the next attack at any moment. It was only at this moment that everyone realized that the outcome of this fight was unpredictable. Su Zimo's strength was enough to threaten Feng Haoyu. Everyone had underestimated this disciple of Weapon Peak. Fufufu, suddenly Feng Haoyu laughed. His laughter was deep with a hint of anger. "Su Zimo, Do you think that you can win against me with that lousy sword formation of yours? Taking a deep breath of air, Feng Haoyu said word by word, today, I'll let you witness the secret skills of the sect, and let you know my true strength. Chapter 129. When he heard that, Su Zimo's expression was calm. However, the disciples below were invigorated and excited. Senior brother Feng is finally going to use his sect's secret skill. I heard that it's one of the 3 great secret skills, ethereal sword. The sword is ethereal and traceless. Ethereal sword is the most advanced sword-wielding technique in the Great Zhou dynasty. I'm finally going to get to see it today. Most of the people present were trial disciples of the 5 peaks, and would not have the chance to see the sect's secret skill on a normal day. At that moment, all of them widened their eyes, wanting to see what was going on. The disheveled old man frowned and looked at Wen Xian. I think we should end this battle here and consider it a draw. To be fair, if Feng Haoyu were to use his sect's secret skill to defeat Su Zimo, he would have already lost. That was because normal trial disciples did not have the right to learn ethereal sword. Right now, the disheveled old man's suggestion was a compromise. After a moment of silence, Wen Xian shook his head. We're already at this stage. How are we going to convince the masses if there's no victor? Wen Xian, you're indignant that Feng Haoyu can't win this round, right? The disheveled old man was a little angry. Yes. Wen Xian glanced sideways at the disheveled old man. I don't care if the 3 of you teach Su Zimo elixir refinement, weapon refinement and sword formations. However, as a disciple of Spirit Peak, Feng Haoyu must not lose on the battlefield. This is the glory of Spirit Peak. The disheveled old man hesitated. Wen Xian waved it off. I'm never wrong about people. Haoyu is the hope of the sect's future. At the end of the day, the legacy of the sect is not about elixir refinement or weapon refinement. Strength is the most important. Right then, in the spirit arena, Su Zimo interrupted the argument between the disheveled old man and Wen Xian. Sect's secret skill? Su Zimo smiled and shook his head. Feng Haoyu, if that's your final trump card, you're bound to lose this battle. Everyone was stunned. No one could have imagined that Su Zimo could say something like that against the sect's secret skill. Was he looking down on the sect's secret skill or Feng Haoyu? What right does Su Zimo have? Ha ha ha. Feng Haoyu roared with laughter. Su Zimo, I'm guessing that you don't know how powerful your sect's secret skill is. Today, I'll teach you how to behave. Quick. Conjuring a sword art, Feng Haoyu sent a stream of spirit qi into the flying sword from his fingertip. The body of the sword trembled incessantly as it tore through the void. A series of afterimages actually appeared behind it, confusing the eyes and making it difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. Seeing this, Wen Xian nodded his head with a hint of admiration in his eyes. The brown-haired youth's expression was grim as he said in a deep voice, Ethereal sword is split into 3 levels. To think that Feng Haoyu would have comprehended the first level afterimage so quickly. Haoyu has the wind spirit root, and is most suited to cultivate misty sword. Otherwise, I would not have let him learn the sect's secret technique at the qi condensation realm. Wen Xian said calmly. In the spirit arena, Su Zimo retrieved the 3 flying swords and hovered them in front of him. He slapped his storage bag and 3 more flying swords appeared in the blink of an eye. Furthermore, all 3 flying swords were inferior-grade spirit weapons as well. The entire place was dumbfounded and in an uproar. 6 inferior-grade flying swords. For qi refinement warriors, this was something unimaginable. What's going on? Holy F***CK. Why did Su Zimo produce 3 inferior-grade spirit weapons at once? Are those things so cheap now? Most of the cultivators' eyes were widened and their mouths were agape, their jaws almost dropping to the ground. Previously, Su Zimo's 3 inferior-grade flying swords had already caused many disciples to be envious. Now that he had produced 3 more, everyone could not take it anymore. The trial disciples who had been in the sect for a few years felt as though they had wasted their time. They did not even manage to obtain a single inferior-grade spirit weapon. However, the other party had produced 6 less than a year after joining the sect. At that moment, most of the sect disciples gradually came to their senses as well. There was no way the 6 almost identical flying swords came from the sect's spirit weapon chamber. The only possibility was that Su Zimo had refined them himself. If I had known earlier, I would have gotten closer to junior brother Su back then. Who knows, I might have been able to get an inferior grade spirit weapon to play with. If I had 6 inferior grade spirit weapons, why would I need to learn sword-wielding techniques? If I met an opponent, I would just throw them at them and smash them to death. Don't spout nonsense. Senior brother Feng is learning the sect's secret skill. It's not something that can be defended against by a bunch of random spirit weapons. Despite the commotion below, the 5 peak masters remained silent. The disheveled old man frowned even more. While 6 inferior grade spirit weapons were powerful, there was no way they could defend against the sect's secret skill. Sensing the disheveled old man's worries, the brown-haired youth consoled, "No matter what, this lad is truly talented in weapon refinement. If we groom him well, he might be able to shock everyone in the sect competition." In other words, the brown-haired youth was implying that even if Su Zimo lost this match, it would not affect his position in the sect. After all, everyone had their strengths and weaknesses. Su Zimo was skilled in weapon refinement and elixir refinement while Feng Haoyu was skilled in combat. The two of them had different strengths. However, they did not notice that Xianyi, who was seated beside the brown-haired youth, was extremely nervous right now as he stared fixedly at Su Zimo with a hint of agitation in his eyes. It's true that 6 flying swords alone won't be able to defend against the sect's secret skill. However, if, in the spirit arena, when Feng Haoyu saw Su Zimo summon 6 flying swords at the same time, his expression changed slightly. However, it returned to normal almost instantly as he scoffed coldly, "Su Zimo, you're way too naive. Do you think that you can defend against my sword just because you have 6 inferior grade spirit weapons? Go." A cold glint flashed through Feng Haoyu's eyes as he hollered softly. His sword dashed over with a chilling sword chi that tore through the air with a shuddering explosion. A series of afterimages appeared behind the sword in a dazzling manner. With a calm expression, Su Zimo waved his hands continuously, controlling the 6 flying swords in midair. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The 6 flying swords crisscrossed in midair, leaving behind streams of sword chi. The tripartite sword formation was a triangular sword formation. As for the hexagonal sword formation, it was an evolved version of the tripartite sword formation. By stacking 2 triangular sword formations together and fusing them together, there were 6 sword formation corners. Be it in terms of defense or killing prowess, it had increased tremendously. What's that? Where have I seen that hexagonal star formed by flying swords before? That seems to be the symbol on Peak Master Xianyi's sleeves. Everyone looked towards Xianyi instinctively. At that moment, Xianyi had already stood up. In his excitement, he nodded. Good, good, good. To think that you've really mastered the hexagonal sword formation. The other 4 Peak Masters had looks of disbelief on their faces as well. There was only a single sword formation master in the sect Xianyi. Furthermore, as a perfected Jin Dan, he naturally knew how difficult it was to become a sword formation master. Xianyi had a hexagonal star pattern on his sleeves. It was clear that he was rather proud of it as well. But now, the reappearance of the hexagonal sword formation, and the fact that it was created by a Qi refinement warrior shocked everyone. Misty Peak, Ethereal Palace. Patriarch Lingyun's heart skipped a beat as he suddenly opened his eyes. A strange glint flashed through his eyes as he murmured softly, "It's the hexagonal sword formation?" In the skies above Array Peak, a pair of gigantic wings was faintly discernible within the clouds as a pair of eyes watched everything that was happening in the spirit arena silently. Fufu, this lad. Not bad, not bad. Chapter 130. The hexagonal star sword formation formed by the 6 flying swords shone with a bedazzling light as it blocked in front of Su Zimo. Feng Haoyu's sword was extremely fast and there were many sword shadows. It was difficult to discern where the sword was with one's eyes alone. However, the advantage of the sword formation was also evident at this moment. The sword formation formed by the 6 flying swords was enough to block Su Zimo's figure. If Feng Haoyu's sword were to pierce over, it would definitely collide against the sword formation. Clang! True enough. There was a crisp sound when Feng Haoyu's flying sword collided against the sword formation. Both sides were wrestling. Break! Feng Haoyu controlled his flying sword and injected spirit chi continuously. His eyes were widened and his body trembled. He was already exerting all his strength, wanting to break through the defense of the hexagonal sword formation. Behind the sword formation, Su Zimo's expression was calm as he pushed and twisted with both hands. The light of the formation pattern shone brightly. The hexagonal sword formation spun and repelled Feng Haoyu's flying sword instantly. It's impolite not to reciprocate. Feng Haoyu, have a taste of the power of my sword formation as well. Let's see if your sect's secret skill can defend against it. Su Zimo reversed the hexagonal sword formation and pointed forward. In midair, the gigantic hexagonal star sword formation that shone with a bedazzling light tore through the voids and crushed towards Feng Haoyu. All the disciples of the 5 peaks were on tenterhooks as they held their breaths. Everyone realized that the outcome of the battle could very well be decided after this move. At that moment, the 5 peak masters had grim expressions as well. The hexagonal sword formation was already a grade 2 sword formation. Even if Feng Haoyu cultivated the sect's secret skill, he would not be able to defend against the might of the hexagonal sword formation head-on. However, in the eyes of perfected being Jin Dan, it was not as though Feng Haoyu had no chance of winning. At that moment, if Feng Haoyu were to abandon his defense and continue controlling his flying sword to release his sect's secret skill to attack Su Zimo directly, the outcome of the battle would be unpredictable. However, this required a kind of fearlessness and courage to disregard life and death. In a flash, Feng Haoyu's expression changed starkly. Against the incoming hexagonal sword formation with a terrifying might, Feng Haoyu instinctively chose to defend passively. Quick! Conjuring the ethereal sword art, Feng Haoyu injected all the spirit qi in his body into the flying sword and charged towards the incoming hexagonal sword formation. When he saw this, Wen Xian sighed softly as disappointment flashed through his eyes. Defeated. If Feng Haoyu chose to fight head-on, he would definitely lose this match. Boom! The flying sword collided with the hexagonal sword formation and exploded with a loud bang. Sparks flew in all directions as a hot current swept out. The sword formation trembled and almost fell apart. However, after swaying a little, it still stabilized. As for Feng Haoyu's flying sword, it was directly repelled. The hexagonal sword formation paused for a moment before continuing forward. Ah! Seeing this scene, the crowd could not help but exclaim. Everyone realized that the number 1 of Spirit Peak was most likely going to be defeated soon. Right then, Feng Haoyu swiped his storage bag and swallowed a qi replenishing elixir. Summoning his silver shield, he roared and pushed it forward. Clang! 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 The hexagonal sword formation spun and continuously struck the silver shield. With each collision, Feng Haoyu would stagger back a step as his face turned paler, and his body trembled violently. Bang! Finally, the hexagonal sword formation dissipated. At the same time, Feng Haoyu was sent flying as well. Falling from the spirit arena, he rolled a couple of times on the ground and his clothes were covered in dust, looking wretched. When Xian closed his eyes, the disheveled old man heaved a long sigh of relief, finally relieved. The crowd was silent. After a moment, little Fatty waved his fists and cheered. Shui and the others were agitated and could not contain their excitement. A disciple of Weapon Peak defeating the number 1 of Spirit Peak. This had never happened in the thousands of years of the sect. Furthermore, it was a cross-level defeat. Many Spirit Peak disciples were silent and dejected as they looked at Feng Haoyu, who was crawling up from the ground with conflicted expressions. It wasn't that the number 1 of Spirit Peak this year wasn't strong enough. On the contrary, the number 1 of Spirit Peak this year was stronger than before because Feng Haoyu had learned the sect's secret skill at Qi Refinement Realm. However, what was exasperating was that an even more frightening disciple had appeared from Weapon Peak. He was skilled in elixir and weapon cultivation, and had even become a sword formation master. In the end, he released a grade 2 sword formation and defeated Feng Haoyu in a single move. It was said that Qi Refinement warriors' fighting methods were relatively simple. However, this battle was full of twists and turns as both parties revealed their trump cards. It was truly an eye-opener for the disciples. Su Zimo put away his flying swords with a hint of fatigue on his face. Even though the sword formation was strong, controlling 6 flying swords at the same time consumed even more spirit qi. At that moment, the spirit qi within his body was already depleted. Fufufu. Right then, a sinister laughter sounded from below the spirit arena. attracting countless gazes. I haven't lost yet. Feng Haoyu stood up slowly with blood still dripping from the corner of his mouth. His expression was menacing and his eyes were filled with madness. Su Zimo was about to leave the spirit arena when he heard that. He could not help but stop in his tracks and look over with a frown. Withdrawing a jade bottle from his storage bag, Feng Haoyu poured out an elixir and swallowed it before saying coldly, Su Zimo, you'll definitely lose today. What's that? I think it's a foundation establishment elixir. Senior brother Feng is trying to forcefully establish his foundation establishment. When he saw that, the disheveled old man stood up and said in a deep voice, Wen Xian, aren't you going to stop him? The Five Peaks face-off is a spar between those of the same cultivation realm. Feng Haoyu is now a foundation establishment cultivator, and he's fighting against Su Zimo. What's the meaning of this? Wen Xian closed his eyes with a hesitant expression as he struggled internally. He also knew that even if Feng Haoyu was a foundation establishment cultivator and defeated Su Zimo, it would be an unfair victory. However, if Feng Haoyu was defeated in this battle, there was a high chance that he would develop a mental demon and never be able to recover from it. Feng Haoyu was someone that he had handpicked and even viewed as the future hope of the sect. When Xian could not bear it, Xian Yi persuaded as well, let's forget about this battle. It's against the rules. When he heard that, Wen Xian suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, what are the rules? This isn't a Five Peaks face-off, it's a private fight. Even if Haoyu is a foundation establishment cultivator, that's his own strength. Also Xian Yi, the hexagonal sword formation is a grade 2 formation, and you imparted it to Su Zimo beforehand. Do you still have any respect for the rules? Xian Yi frowned and shook his head. The reason why I imparted the hexagonal sword formation to Su Zimo was because he was qualified. Actually, Xian Yi's words had already vaguely revealed who was the mysterious challenger who cleared level 10 of the 10 Formations Pagoda. However, right now, Wen Xian and the disheveled old man were in a fit of anger and did not think too much about it. Naturally, they did not catch the hidden meaning in Xian Yi's words. When Xian flicked his sleeves, if not for the hexagonal sword formation, Su Zimo would have been defeated by now. Since he was the one who broke the rules first, what's wrong with Haoyu advancing to a foundation establishment cultivator and fighting against Su Zimo? Wen Xian, are you crazy? The disheveled old man could not help but scold. What's the point of fighting now that he's a foundation establishment cultivator? Why don't you fight against Jining Xinjuan instead? The disciples of the Five Peaks below were dumbfounded. As peak masters, they were actually arguing over a battle between Qi refinement warriors. To everyone, this was even more exciting than the battle just now. Alright. The disciples below are all watching. Can you guys act like elders? Lung Nuan frowned and persuaded. Chapter 131. Feng Haoyu had already cultivated to perfected qi condensation and could naturally break through to foundation establishment realm at any time. However, he had not expected that he would make a breakthrough in the battle against Su Zimo. This was somewhat hasty. If it was anyone else, there was a high chance that they would fail at foundation establishment. However, Feng Haoyu was different. Be it in terms of potential or spirit root, he was one of the best. Although he was injured, he was confident that he could advance to foundation establishment realm after consuming the Qi replenishing elixir and foundation establishment elixir. As the Five Peak Masters were arguing, the medicinal power of the foundation establishment elixir spread through Feng Haoyu's body, flowing through his limbs and bones before surging into his dantian. Within his dantian, his qi rumbled and gushed continuously. Driven by the immense medicinal power and coupled with Feng Haoyu's control, his incomparably vast qi began to compress towards the center. The size of his qi was shrinking. However, the aura it emitted was getting increasingly terrifying. The difference between qi condensation and foundation establishment was a major realm leap. In cultivation, every major realm leap would result in an extremely obvious increase in strength. That was also the reason why it was common for cultivators to kill opponents who were a minor realm above them in fights. However, it was difficult to defeat opponents who were a major realm above them. That was also the reason why cultivators' titles would change every time they broke through a major realm. For example, Qi condensation cultivators were known as Qi refinement warriors. As for Foundation Establishment cultivators, they were known as cultivators. At Jindan realm, they could even be titled as perfected beings. From Qi condensation to Foundation Establishment, the spirit Qi in one's Dantian would undergo a qualitative change. It would no longer be in a gaseous state but liquid state. The energy would be purer, more condensed and stronger. With that as a foundation, one would be able to learn and release all sorts of powerful spirit arts in the cultivation world. Right now, that transformation was happening within Feng Haoyu's body. No matter how the five peak masters argued, they maintained their rationality and did not interrupt Feng Haoyu's breakthrough process. After all, there was a high chance that Feng Haoyu's cultivation path would be crippled if he failed at Foundation Establishment. That would also mean the fall of a genius of a generation. Standing in the spirit arena, Su Zimo did not make a move as he watched everything unfold. None of the people present were fools. To be fair, Feng Haoyu would have lost if it was a life and death battle. Which enemy would give him the chance to break through? Most likely, he would have taken advantage of this opportunity to attack and kill him on the spot. However, to everyone's surprise and confusion, Su Zimo's gaze was very calm, as if he was looking at something that had nothing to do with him. After an unknown period of time, the vast sea of qi in Feng Haoyu's Dantian disappeared, transforming into a drop of spiritual liquid. An even more terrifying aura was slowly released, sweeping out in all directions. In terms of volume, this droplet of spirit essence was extremely small. However, in terms of strength, it was many times greater than the qi sea from before. Feng Haoyu heaved a long sigh of relief. When he returned to the spirit arena, he had already undergone a complete transformation. His aura was sharp and his battle intent was torrential. Feng Haoyu smiled and asked Su Zimo to control 6 flying swords. You don't have much spirit qi left in your body, right? Su Zimo didn't answer. He just looked at Feng Haoyu quietly. On the other side, when Xian and the disheveled old man were still arguing, the fight between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu had already escalated to a contest between two peaks. In Wen Xian's opinion, even though this battle was already unfair to Su Zimo, Feng Haoyu was a disciple of Spirit Peak after all. Furthermore, he was the number 1 of Spirit Peak this year. He couldn't lose. Wen Xian did not realize that his attitude had instead triggered the indignance in Su Zimo's heart. Since you want Feng Haoyu to win, fine, I'll make sure he loses. Furthermore, it was a crushing defeat. Waving his sleeves, Feng Haoyu's flying sword that had fallen far away turned into a streak of light and arrived before him instantly. The mere act of recalling his flying sword sent chills down the spines of many disciples. It was too fast. After advancing to a Foundation Establishment cultivator, Feng Haoyu's speed of sword maneuvering had more than doubled from before. Coupled with the support of wind attribute spirit energy and the sex secret skill, Ethereal Sword, which Qi Refinement Warrior could defend against Feng Haoyu's next attack. They might not even be able to dodge, let alone defend. The disheveled old man scoffed coldly and stopped arguing with Wen Xian, declaring loudly, Su Zimo, let's not fight anymore. Since Spirit Peak is going to win this match, so what if he wins? Everyone here knows what the outcome is. With that, the disheveled old man left his seat and walked towards the spirit arena, saying, My horizons have truly been broadened. To think that a Foundation Establishment cultivator would have the cheek to fight against a Qi Refinement warrior in the same sect. Isn't he embarrassed? Wen Xian's expression was terrible. If Su Zimo were to admit defeat, there was no way he could force the other party to fight. When Feng Haoyu heard the disheveled old man's words, he felt a burning sensation on his face as well. Right then, Su Zimo suddenly laughed and asked, Master, it's already very embarrassing for a Foundation Establishment cultivator to fight against a Qi Refinement warrior in the same sect. Wouldn't it be even more embarrassing if he were to lose? The disheveled old man froze for a moment and paused in his tracks, not understanding what Su Zimo meant by that. Su Zimo clenched his fists and his eyes shone brightly as he shouted, Feng Haoyu, let me tell you, even if you're a Foundation Establishment cultivator, you won't be able to do it. How dare you spout such nonsense? Die! A ruthless glint flashed through his eyes as he conjured a sword art with both hands. With a soft holler, his flying sword shot out and left a series of afterimages in the void. The sword chi was like frost and it was chilling. Ah! A series of exclamations sounded from the crowd. That sword was way too fast. Everyone merely felt their vision blur, and the flying sword had already arrived before Su Zimo. However, the next moment, everyone's exclamations stopped abruptly. The disciples of the Five Peaks were shocked to discover that Su Zimo had vanished from the spot unknowingly as well. Bang! It was only then that a deafening sound echoed from the spirit arena. A footprint appeared on the ground where Su Zimo was initially standing, shattering the surrounding stone slabs and leaving spiderweb-like cracks. Everyone focused their gazes. In midair, a green figure was charging towards Feng Haoyu at an extremely fast speed. The flying sword crossed with the figure and a crisp sound could be heard. If that sword had struck Su Zimo, blood would definitely have spilled. However, there were no bloodstains on the spirit arena. He dodged it? Against a Foundation Establishment cultivator who released a secret skill of his sect, Su Zimo managed to dodge it. What was with that crisp sound? The disciples of the Five Peaks below could not see it clearly. The flying sword was truly too fast and Su Zimo had only crossed paths with it for an instant. However, the Five Peak masters present could see it clearly. The moment Feng Haoyu attacked, Su Zimo left his spot and charged towards the incoming flying sword. Just as the flying sword was about to strike, Su Zimo suddenly made an extremely strange dodge in midair, and dodged the flying sword by a hair's breadth. It was a hair's breadth away. That crisp sound was produced when the flying sword struck the sect badge on Su Zimo's waist. Chapter 132. In the spirit arena. Nobody could understand what Feng Haoyu was feeling right now. When he saw Su Zimo charge over, Feng Haoyu felt as though he was not facing a human, but a savage fiend demon. Feng Haoyu could clearly see a hint of scarlet blood in the depths of Su Zimo's eyes. Dense veins had also appeared on his face, and it was a ghastly sight that was terrifying and horrifying. Feng Haoyu was shocked and instinctively summoned his silver shield to block in front of him. When Su Zimo arrived before Feng Haoyu, he took the final step and stomped on the ground. With a loud bang, the entire spirit arena shook. Splash! Su Zimo's bloodline surged and the shocking sound of a tsunami could be heard clearly by all the cultivators present. Swoosh! Su Zimo raised his arm and in midair, the clothes on his arm were torn into shreds. What appeared before everyone was a muscular and thick arm that resembled a gigantic python. Green veins popped and his muscles were knotted together like molten steel, filled with explosive power. When the fist landed, it was filled with flesh and blood growing in size. It was like a gigantic seal that crashed down with a terrifying aura. At that moment, everyone was hallucinating. Although Feng Haoyu was a Foundation Establishment cultivator, he was as insignificant as an ant against Su Zimo's fist. Boom! The fist collided with the silver shield, and an earth-shattering explosion erupted. It was deafening. The disciples of the Five Peaks felt their hearts skip a beat as their throats quivered and they could not help but gulp. Crack! 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 A series of strange sounds echoed. A gigantic crack appeared on the silver shield in Feng Haoyu's hands. The crack continued to extend and eventually covered the entire shield. It shattered. An inferior-grade spirit weapon was shattered by Su Zimo's bare hands. The crowd was dead silent. Not a single sound could be heard. Everyone looked at this scene in horror, forgetting to breathe as their eyes widened. Feng Haoyu fell far away from the spirit arena and rolled a few times on the ground. He coughed out blood with his eyes closed and his face pale. It was unknown if he was dead or alive. Was it over just like that? The swiftness of this change caught everyone by surprise. Initially, Feng Haoyu's victory was guaranteed when he advanced to Foundation Establishment. However, the tables were suddenly turned as Su Zimo closed in on him and sent him flying out of the spirit arena with a single punch, completely losing his combat strength. Everyone's first reaction was that Su Zimo had cultivated some kind of extremely powerful body refining technique. But why did this body refinement technique look like some kind of demonic technique? Although the bloodstains on Su Zimo's face had gradually faded, every cultivator had seen the scene just now. In the spirit arena, Su Zimo lowered his head and tried to calm his blood. Just now, when he attacked, he had intentionally suppressed it. However, the new bloodline that he had gained from cultivating the marrow cleansing chapter had completely merged with his bloodline. It was difficult to differentiate between the two and he could not control it at all. Thankfully, Suzimo did not show any obvious signs of demonization. Even so, this scene attracted the attention of the 5 peak masters. At that moment, all 5 peak masters stood up with grim expressions as they looked at Suzimo with doubtful, suspicious and scrutinizing gazes. Right then, a blinding light burst forth from the other side of the spirit arena, diverting everyone's attention. The light came from the 10 formation stele. On the 10 formation stele, the words on the first row had changed. There were 3 words in the original blank space. Suzimo. Suzimo, cleared level 10 of the 10 formations pagoda. Took 7 days and 18 hours. That line of words caused everyone to exclaim. Suzimo? Why is it Suzimo? This doesn't make sense. Is there a problem with the 10 formation stele? The mysterious challenger is Suzimo. The disciples of the 5 peaks were so shocked that they could not even speak properly. Suddenly a disciple shouted, "Guys, look! That's Suzimo's sect badge." Everyone looked down. An inferior grade flying sword and sect badge were at the feet of the 10 formation stele. The flying sword belonged to Feng Haoyu. However, the sect badge belonged to Suzimo. "I've got it!" Suddenly, someone said. Just now, when senior brother Feng and junior brother Su were fighting, senior brother Feng's flying sword knocked down junior brother Su's sect badge and struck the 10 formation stele. At that point, everyone was enlightened. However, right after, everyone was shocked by an even more unacceptable truth. If the mysterious challenger was Suzimo, Suzimo would be the first person to challenge the formation. This meant that the number 1 of Array Peak this year should be Suzimo as well. Because Spirit Peak's master had once forbidden Suzimo from entering Spirit Peak, he could not take part in the face-off. However, in today's battle, Suzimo had defeated the number 1 of Spirit Peak, Feng Haoyu. This meant that Suzimo was the number 1 of Spirit Peak this year. Coupled with Weapon and Elixir Peak, Suzimo was the unprecedented number 1 of the 4 peaks this year. As everyone looked at Suzimo in the spirit arena, their gazes changed gradually. A person like this could no longer be called a genius. He could be called a monster incarnate. Little Fatty was completely stunned. She could not help but recall that back in Suzimo's cave abode, Suzimo had casually said that challenging the array formation was nothing much. At that time, he was unhappy and told the other party to be humble and keep a low profile. "Bro, you're too humble," Little Fatty said with a long face. Little Fatty knew that it was not Suzimo's fault. At that time, Suzimo had even said that he was the mysterious challenger. However, Little Fatty did not believe him at all, thinking that Suzimo was just making a casual remark. The Array Peak disciple, Zhongwan, smiled bitterly as he lowered his head and muttered to himself, "I had countless guesses about your identity, but I could not have guessed that you're an Outer Peak disciple. Furthermore, it hasn't even been a year since you joined the sect." Heis. Lung Ro's eyes lit up as well as she could not help but think, if you were given more time, would you have taken away my number 1 of Talisman Peak as well? Not to mention the numerous disciples below. Even the 4 peak masters were stunned on the spot. Since Xianyi knew about this, it was naturally normal. However, the eyes of the other 4 peak masters were filled with disbelief. When Xian looked at Xianyi with an apologetic gaze. Previously, he had misunderstood that Xianyi had disregarded the sex rules and imparted the hexagonal sword formation to Suzimo without permission. But now when Xian knew that Xianyi's actions were entirely because Suzimo was qualified. Suddenly when Xian recalled something more important and arrived beside Feng Haoyu in a flash. After checking carefully, he heaved a sigh of relief. Feng Haoyu had merely fainted and his life was not in danger. When Xian withdrew an elixir from his storage bag and fed it to Feng Haoyu, raising his head, he looked at Suzimo in the spirit arena with a burning gaze. At that moment, Suzimo had already calmed his bloodline and was back to normal. However, the 5 peak masters did not say anything. They needed an explanation from Suzimo. Otherwise, even if Suzimo was the number 1 of the 4 peaks and an unprecedented monster incarnate, they could not let him live. Chapter 133. The 5 peak masters had a tacit understanding regarding Suzimo's incident. Suzimo had cultivated some sort of body tempering technique that was extremely terrifying, and could even defeat early-stage foundation establishment cultivators. Of course, it was undeniable that he had just entered Foundation establishment realm and had an unstable foundation. Furthermore, he was caught off guard. Even though Suzimo had won that battle, the five peak masters felt that the outcome would be uncertain if the two of them were to fight again. Firstly, the origin of that body tempering technique was suspicious. There was a high chance that such a terrifying body tempering technique was a secret technique of some sect similar to Ethereal Sword. If that was the case, Suzimo's background was worth investigating. Could he be someone sent by other sects to hide in Misty Peak? What sort of ulterior motive did he have to join Misty Peak? That was something that no sect could tolerate. Once discovered, the light punishment would be crippling one's cultivation and banishing one from the sect. Even the heavy punishment would be death. Secondly, that body tempering technique did not seem to be of the orthodox path. Instead, it seemed more like an evil fiend technique. If that was the case, it would prove that Suzimo was someone of the fiend sects and there was no way he would be spared. Even if they took pity on his talent, the five peak masters would kill him on the spot. There was no room for negotiation in this matter. Immortals and fiends had different Daos and could not work together. Furthermore, someone of the fiend sects was lurking in the sect with ulterior motives. She recalled the various abnormalities that happened when Suzimo entered the sect. The explosion of the spirit testing gate, breaking through Little Crane's obstruction to reach the peak of the mountain, the sudden attack on Xianyi after enduring the 8 distresses formation, and the fact that he controlled a level 3 spirit fire the moment he entered the sect. Suzimo, do you have anything to say? The cold man asked coldly. A look of pity flashed through Xianyi's eyes. Initially, he thought that Suzimo could become the second sword formation master of the sect. However, if that sword formation master was someone of the fiend sects, Xianyi would definitely not allow it. Slaying demons was the duty of cultivators of the orthodox path. As one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty, Misty Peak would naturally not compromise on this matter. Moreover, Suzimo's talent was too strong. If he was really from the demon sect, then all the more he could not be allowed to live. Once he matured, he would definitely become an overlord of the evil sect, and become a great threat to all the righteous sects. Suzimo didn't know how to explain. However, through the gazes of the 5 peak masters, he realized that if he could not pass this hurdle, he would most likely face a great disaster. A calamity of life and death. Suzimo had just opened his mouth when a loud and clear cry of a crane suddenly rang out from the clouds above the 9th heaven. Whoosh! The wind whistled as a huge pair of wings covered half of the sky. A huge shadow loomed over them. Everyone subconsciously looked up. A huge red-crowned crane descended from the sky, flapping its wings, blowing up a sandstorm. The clothes of many disciples fluttered in the wind, and some of them even lost their footing and swayed in the wind. The divine guardian beast had unexpectedly appeared. No one had expected that a fight between Qi refinement warriors would attract the attention of such a powerful existence like the sect. In the eyes of many disciples, the red-crowned crane was the most mysterious existence in the sect. Although it was rare to see it, it was said to be even older than the history of the sect. However, one thing was for sure: the strength and status of the red-crowned crane was something that even the 5 peak masters had to look up to. Greetings, senior. The arrival of the red-crowned crane caused the 5 peak masters' expressions to turn serious as they bowed hurriedly. Floating in midair motionlessly, the red-crowned crane swept its cold gaze across the crowd before landing on Suzimo. Suddenly, it spoke in human language. Disciple of Weapon Peak, Suzimo has gone berserk during his cultivation. His punishment is to stay in seclusion in Thunderclap Valley for an indefinite period of time to reflect on his mistakes. Everyone was stunned. The 5 peak masters were stunned as well. What surprised the 5 peak masters was that the red-crowned crane's tone did not seem to be suspicious of Suzimo's background, and was merely punishing him to stay in seclusion in Thunderclap Valley to reflect on his mistakes. In other words, the red-crowned crane was implying that Suzimo was not cultivating a demonic technique, and that he had merely made a mistake during his cultivation, causing him to go berserk. However, the contradiction was that if Suzimo's background and cultivation technique were normal, there was no need to punish him or even send him to Thunderclap Valley to reflect on his mistakes. If he was not in the wrong, why should he reflect on his mistakes? If it was merely Qi deviation, all he had to do was pay more attention and cultivate in seclusion in his cave abode to consolidate his foundation. When they heard the words Thunderclap Valley, the 5 Peak Masters exchanged glances. All of them could see the strange look in each other's eyes. They all thought of the same person at the same time. The trial disciples of the sect were no strangers to Thunderclap Valley as well. Thunderclap Valley was a mysterious valley formed by a strange terrain between the main peak and the back mountain of ethereal immortal sect. The rumbling of thunder could be heard throughout the year, shocking one's mind. The valley was not big and was barren. Every time there was a thunderstorm, countless bolts of lightning would fall. The lack of spirit chi within, coupled with the constant rumbling of thunder, made it almost impossible to cultivate. The moment one was sent to Thunderclap Valley, the punishment would be second only to being expelled from the sect. Suddenly, little Fatty recalled something and muttered to himself, "It's over, it's over. I've long advised Bro to release that little crane. Great, this big crane must be using this opportunity to punish Bro." Naturally, little Fatty knew that little crane was trapped in Suzimo's cave abode. Some of the disciples recalled how Suzimo had bullied little crane when he first joined the sect. Now that the red-crowned crane had descended personally, they could not help but connect the dots. That Suzimo sure is unlucky. He was tossed to Thunderclap Valley right after he became number 1 of the 4 peaks. A disciple chuckled in the crowd. He should be fine. When junior brother Sue comes out, he'll be just as strong. Humph, you didn't hear the main point of Senior Crane's words. That person continued. Senior Crane said that he would be in seclusion for an indefinite period to reflect on his mistakes. If Senior Crane doesn't allow it, Suzimo will have to stay in there for the rest of his life. Is it that harsh? Another disciple was shocked. That person shrugged. Even if it's not that harsh, you won't be able to cultivate in there for 8 to 10 years. By the time you come out, we'll already be foundation establishment cultivators and inner sect disciples. So what if you're number 1 of the 4 peaks? You're still a level 9 chi refinement warrior. Many disciples could not help but feel shocked when they heard that. In the spirit arena, Suzimo remained silent. In reality, he knew very well that the red-crowned crane did not throw him into Thunderclap Valley for revenge. If it wanted revenge, the red-crowned crane could have done it long ago without any reason. Why wait until now? Furthermore, Suzimo had a vague feeling. The red-crowned crane did this to save him. That was because if the red-crowned crane had not appeared, he would have either been crippled of his cultivation and expelled from the sect or killed on the spot. However, there was something that Suzimo could not understand as well. If the red-crowned crane only wanted to save him, why did it have to toss him into Thunderclap Valley? What was the deeper meaning behind that? Chapter 134. Even if the 5 Peak Masters were confused, they did not dare to question the arrival of the divine guardian beast and the decision itself. The crane soared into the skies and flapped its gigantic wings, causing a gust of wind to howl. Without any apparent movements, Suzimo's figure was lifted off the ground uncontrollably and disappeared from everyone's sight in the blink of an eye. After the crane left, the 5 Peak Masters exchanged glances and headed for Misty Peak as well. This matter was so strange that the 5 Peak Masters had to report it to the sect master. Even after the 5 Peak Masters left, the disciples of the 5 Peaks were still gathered at the same spot, discussing fervently. Senior Crane is so amazing. To think that it knows our human language and can even speak it. I heard that demons can speak the human language after cultivating to a certain realm. That's not all. It's said that some strong demons can even transform into humans and look exactly the same. For many disciples who had joined the sect for a few years, this was the first time they were seeing the true appearance of the divine guardian beast, and they were extremely curious. Senior Brother Feng has suffered a huge blow this time round. Initially, he declared that he was going to take the number 1 of 3 peaks. But in the end, he only managed to take the number 1 of Spirit Peak. Didn't the number 1 of Spirit Peak lose to Junior Brother Sue? It's not just Senior Brother Feng. It's a huge blow to Spirit Peak as well. That's right. Back then, the Peak Master even forbade Junior Brother Sue from entering Spirit Peak. To think that he would even defeat the number 1 of Spirit Peak. The number 1 of 4 peaks. Who would have thought that the mysterious challenger would be Junior Brother Sue? Ethereal Main Peak, Ethereal Palace. The 5 Peak Masters arrived at the same time. Patriarch Lingyun was seated at the top of the palace, seemingly resting with his eyes closed. When Xian cupped his fists, Patriarch, after the battle between Su Zimo and Feng Haoyu in Array Peak Spirit Arena today, in the end, I got it. Before Wen Xian could finish, he was interrupted by Patriarch Lingyun. Lingyun opened his eyes. His pupils were like two stars, deep and mysterious. He said in a low voice, "The crane has already made arrangements for this. Patriarch Su Zimo's body refining technique is not simple. Among the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty, the Southern Mountain sect is the strongest in body tempering. Since Su Zimo is not cultivating a demonic technique, could it be a secret technique of the Southern Mountain sect?" The brown-haired youth was still worried and asked, "I don't know either." Patriarch Lingyun shook his head. The 5 peak masters were speechless. When Xian frowned, "Patriarch Senior Crane is a demon after all." Lingyun's expression changed as his gaze suddenly turned sharp. He narrowed his eyes and asked, "Wen Xian, what are you trying to say?" A powerful pressure came crashing down. Wen Xian's face turned pale and he was unable to continue speaking. The atmosphere in the Misty Palace suddenly became extremely oppressive and dropped to the freezing point. After a moment, Xian Yi said, "Patriarch, Wen Xian doesn't mean anything else. It's just that Su Zimo's actions can't help but remind us of someone in the past. If Su Zimo is the second him, we'll have to be more careful in the future. There's no need to worry. Leave this matter to the crane." Pausing for a moment, Lingyun continued, "Even though the crane is a demon, you guys shouldn't doubt it when it followed our founding master to conquer the cultivation world and founded Misty Peak. Also, if the crane wasn't in the sect, do you think that Misty Peak would be able to become one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty?" When they heard that, the 5 peak masters' hearts skipped a beat. They had long known that the crane had a special status in the sect. However, humans and demons were different after all. The notion that those of different races would definitely have different intentions was still deeply ingrained in them. The 5 of them had truly not expected the crane to be so important to the sect. "You guys can disperse." Lingyun waved his hand. After the 5 peak masters left, a hint of fatigue appeared on his face. Deep in his eyes there was a hint of worry. Enveloped by an invisible force, Su Zimo arrived in a valley before long. After stepping on solid ground, Su Zimo looked around. Surrounded by mountains, the valley was barren and barren. Rumble, rumble, boom, boom. A series of deafening thunder reverberated through the valley. Su Zimo frowned. The spirit chi in this valley was extremely thin. Coupled with the interference of the thunder, it was almost impossible to cultivate. If he were to stay here, he would truly feel as though time was passing by slowly. After placing Su Zimo on the ground, the immortal crane circled in midair before descending suddenly. When it landed on the ground, it transformed into a beautiful woman with red hair that was coiled up in a bun, looking dignified and dignified. Su Zimo was stunned on the spot. The red-haired beauty before him was no different from a real human. If he had not known beforehand, Su Zimo would not have imagined that the person before him was actually a crane. With a wave of her hand, the red-haired beauty formed a barrier around the two of them, temporarily isolating them from the thunder outside. "Do you know why I brought you here?" The red-haired beauty looked at Su Zimo with a gentle gaze instead of coldness. "I don't know," Su Zimo shook his head. However, the red-haired beauty's next sentence caused Su Zimo to turn pale with fright and almost lose his composure. "The cultivation technique of the demon race that you cultivate is very powerful." The red-haired beauty's words were shocking. Su Zimo's expression changed and his heart skipped a beat. Instinctively, he lowered his head to hide the shock in his eyes. "Senior Crane, what do you mean by that? Is it testing me, or has it discovered something?" Countless thoughts flashed through Su Zimo's mind as he froze on the spot. "If I'm testing you, your reaction is more than enough to explain everything." The red-haired beauty chuckled. "Don't worry. The reason why I brought you here is naturally because I don't want to expose your secret." Su Zimo asked, "When did you discover it, Senior?" "Half a year ago, you attacked on Spirit Peak and knocked out a Spirit Peak disciple with a single palm strike. Although it was a short process, there was still a trace of the demon race's bloodline aura that others might not be able to detect. However, as a demon, I'm naturally extremely familiar with that aura," the red-haired beauty explained. Pausing for a moment, the red-haired beauty continued, "You're still considered a human right now. However, as time passes by and the bloodline in your body fuses completely with the newly born demon race's bloodline, you'll completely turn into a demon and lose all traces of the human race." Suzimo remained silent. He had already noticed that as well. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stopped cultivating the marrow cleansing section for the past half a year. No matter what, Suzimo was still a human at the end of the day. Even if he cultivated the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, he didn't want to completely transform into a demon. As though she could read Suzimo's mind, the red-haired beauty continued, "Even if you stop cultivating this demon race's cultivation technique, the demon race's bloodline is already fused into your body. If you're not careful, you'll be exposed. I don't have to explain the consequences of that, right?" Suzimo nodded. Once they knew that he was a demon, there were only two ways for the sect to deal with him. They could either kill him or make him sign a blood oath to become someone else's spirit beast. Even if he escaped from the sect, Suzimo wouldn't be able to move around freely in the cultivation world. Those were the only two ways for cultivators to deal with demons. Chapter 135. I can help you hide it this time round. But what are you going to do next? Suddenly, the red-haired beauty's questioning raised a huge question in Suzimo's mind. Suzimo asked, "Senior, why do all cultivators have such a ruthless attitude towards demons with almost no room for negotiation?" When she heard that question, the red-haired beauty froze for a moment. Reminiscing, she sighed gently. The feud between the two races has a long history that can be traced back to the primordial era. Primordial era. This was the first time Suzimo heard that term, and he could not help but be confused. The primordial era was a word that carried a tragic aura, and was filled with the vicissitudes of time. The red-haired beauty seemed to be filled with emotions as she murmured softly, "That was a magnificent era that lasted for a long time. Many lifeforms were just born and there were thousands of races, including the human race. However, for the human race, that era was a tragic and heavy period of time." For some reason, Suzimo suddenly felt a tightness in his chest, as though he was suffocated by an invisible aura. Just by listening to the crane talk about that period of time, Suzimo already felt that sort of pressure. It was hard to imagine what he would have faced if he had truly been born in that era and experienced it personally. Sensing Suzimo's abnormality, the red-haired beauty snapped out of her trance and shook her head. "Let's not talk about it. All you have to know is that after the primordial era, Tianhuang mainland experienced the ancient era before reaching this day. The feud between the two races spanned 2 eras, and the countless years of hatred have long seeped into the depths of their bloodlines. It's impossible to resolve it." Suzimo nodded and asked with a thought, "Senior, do you have a way to resolve the latent problems in my body by bringing me here?" "There's one, but I don't know if it'll work." The red-haired beauty said, "A genius once appeared in the sect. That person was extremely talented and was not inferior to you. He was seen as the future hope of the sect. Unfortunately, that person betrayed the sect in the end and fell into the fiend Dao, never to return again." "Was that person a demonic cultivator as well?" Suzimo asked in surprise. "No." The red-haired beauty shook her head and said, "This person has an eccentric temperament and acts in an extreme manner. When he showed signs of becoming a devil, the sect discovered this and locked him up here to reflect on his mistakes. With the help of the thunder here, this person actually managed to wash away the devil chi in his body." Suzimo asked, "Senior, do you mean that the sound of thunder might be able to wash away the demonic aura in my blood?" The red-haired woman nodded. Pausing for a moment, the red-haired beauty continued, "However, the demon race cultivation method you cultivate is very powerful. I don't know if this method will work. But how do we make use of the sound of thunder here? I don't understand at all." Suzimo looked confused. "I don't know about that." Suzimo was speechless. Could it be that just by listening to the rolling thunder here, he could wash away the demonic aura in his body? The red-haired beauty continued, "Lightning is one of the most upright and violent types of energy. It's extremely effective against evil spirits. Beasts are naturally afraid of fire, while demons are naturally afraid of thunder. Among the myriad of spells, thunder reigns supreme." Suzimo had a rough idea of what she meant. What the crane meant was that the power of thunder might be able to resolve the issue within his body. The crane merely provided an idea and direction, but it did not know how to resolve it. Right then, Suzimo's heart skipped a beat as he recalled something. After the weapon peak face-off, Suzimo obtained a mystic gold silk armor. From the disheveled old man, he found out that the owner of the mystic gold silk armor was an extremely frightening expert of the sect back then who was invincible in the Foundation establishment in Jindan realms. However, the disheveled old man seemed to have some reservations about this person's unwillingness to talk about it. Suddenly, Suzimo asked, "Senior, did the genius you mentioned wear a mystic gold silk armor back then that's a Khanate spirit weapon?" A look of surprise flashed through the red-haired beauty's eyes as she asked, "You know about that?" Indeed. The expert that the disheveled old man mentioned was the same as the genius that the crane mentioned. "Senior, can you tell me about that person back then?" Suddenly, Suzimo felt an intense curiosity towards that person. "It's nothing much," the red-haired beauty smiled. "Ever since the sect set up the 8 Distresses formation, you're the second person to survive it." "He's the first." Suzimo nodded. He had heard the disheveled old man mention this before. "Do you know how he managed to survive?" the red-haired beauty asked. "I don't know. The 8 Distresses formation is an illusion formation. Within it, you'll meet countless people and many of them are your closest kin. You'll experience the 8 distresses of life such as birth, old age, sickness and death. But this person..." At that point, the red-haired beauty paused for a moment before continuing. "This person killed everyone he saw in the illusion." "Ah!" Suzimo's heart skipped a beat and he could not help but exclaim. Those who were trapped in the 8 Distresses formation would not realize that they were in an illusion because everything they saw was way too real. And this person had killed everyone in the illusion. How terrifying was this person? Could he have already realized that he was in an illusion? Suzimo asked. "I'm not sure," the red-haired beauty shook her head. However, he had yet to condense his chi back then and shouldn't have realized it. "Forget it, these are all old affairs of the sect. Just listen to them," the red-haired beauty said. "I can vaguely guess that you want to cultivate both immortality and demonic cultivation in the future. However, no one has taken this path and your future is unknown. The latent bloodline in your body is only one of them. As your cultivation realm increases, there will be more troubles in the future." Sigh. Suzimo knew that as well. It was the wisest choice to stop cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness right now. However, this cultivation technique had a special meaning to him. This cultivation technique changed the trajectory of Suzimo's life and even the fate of many people around him, including Suzimo himself. Most importantly, this was imparted to him by Daiyu. At the thought of Daiyu, Suzimo could not help but compare her to the red-haired beauty before him. If he was not wrong, Daiyu should belong to the demon race as well. Both of them could take human form, but he did not know whose cultivation realm was higher. "Senior, if a person is born without a spirit root, can you help them plant one?" Suzimo changed his method and did not ask directly. After all, he did not know Daiyu's cultivation realm or Senior Crane's cultivation realm. "Plant a spirit root?" The red-haired beauty smiled. "Let's not talk about me. There's no one in the entire Tianhuang mainland who can do that. Spirit roots are natural objects. If it's fated, it's fated. If it's not, it's not. If a spirit root is planted postnatally, it's equivalent to changing a person's fate. Who in the world can change fate?" The red-haired beauty smiled again. "I'm afraid even perfected immortals can't." Chapter 136. Suzimo did not know what a perfected immortal was. However, when he heard that, he understood one thing. Daiyu was much stronger than Senior Crane. In fact, she was much stronger. After pondering for a moment, Suzimo asked again, "Senior, if I can't purge away the demonic chi in my bloodline with the help of the thunder here, do I have to stay here forever?" After all, the crane merely provided a direction. Suzimo had to figure out how to resolve this issue himself. 1 year. "I'll give you a year," the red-headed beauty said. "If you can't do it within a year, you'll have to think of other ways." Suzimo nodded. "Don't be discouraged. That person did it back then. Your potential isn't any weaker than his, so you might be able to do it as well," The red-headed beauty consoled him before leaving. Without the light barrier, the rumbling thunder reverberated in his ears once more, shocking his mind. The valley was not large and Suzimo looked around but could not find a place to rest. Thus he assumed a lotus position and listened to the thunder in the valley, trying his best to find the secret behind it. Day after day, Suzimo sat in Thunderclap Valley the entire time without any improvement in his cultivation. The demonic chi in his bloodline was still there and showed no signs of dissipating. During this period, Linghu and Little Crane would often sneak over to visit him and bring him food. Normally speaking, other disciples were not allowed to visit those who were trapped in Thunderclap Valley to reflect on their mistakes. However, Little Crane had a special identity and neither it nor Linghu were considered sect disciples. Even though Suzimo trapped Little Crane in the formation previously, Little Crane had also eaten some elixirs and benefited greatly. Coupled with the fact that Suzimo was so pitiful, its attitude towards him had changed greatly. In the blink of an eye, a month passed. Within Thunderclap Valley, Suzimo opened his eyes and sighed gently. He still had no clue. If this were to continue, Suzimo might not be able to think of a solution even if he were to spend 10 years, let alone a year. Seems like that sect expert back then was indeed stronger than me. Suzimo gave a self-mocking laugh. Thinking of this person, Suzimo took out the mystic gold silk armor from his storage bag. There was no one around the Thunder Valley, and Suzimo was not afraid of being spied on. He stood up and channeled the power of his bloodline, causing his veins to bulge and his flesh to expand. Suzimo could clearly feel that the powerful force in his bloodline could destroy the heavens and earth. It was also because of this power that Suzimo was able to defeat Feng Haoyu, who had entered the Foundation establishment realm. Suzimo took a deep breath and used his strength to lift up the mystic gold silk armor. He looked at it up and down. It was Suzimo's first time observing the broken innate spiritual weapon so closely since he obtained it. This mystic gold silk armor was very thin and soft to the touch. It was hard to imagine that such a thin inner armor actually weighed over 10,000 pounds. Just as Suzimo was sizing up the mystic gold silk armor, 2 pieces of paper fell out from the inner armor and landed on the ground. Suzimo exclaimed softly and glanced sideways. Putting down the mystic gold silk armor, he picked up the 2 pieces of paper. The 2 pieces of paper looked old and gave off an ancient aura. One of them was even tattered, and there were clear signs of it being torn at the bottom. There was a sentence written on the first piece of paper. The second piece of paper was filled with words. Suzimo looked at the first piece of paper. This is a cultivation technique that I obtained from an ancient ruin. It's called the Void Thunder Manual. Although it's incomplete, it contains a volume of the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra, and a few other thunder techniques that are rather strong. I left it for the fated. When he saw that line of words, Suzimo came to a realization. If he wasn't wrong, then this void lightning incantation should be recorded on the second page of the tattered paper. Those 2 pieces of paper were left behind by the expert of the sect back then. Suzimo had a conflicted expression and lamented in his heart. For so many years, the mystic gold silk armor had been placed in the spirit weapon chamber, and was almost covered in dust. If not for the fact that Suzimo had joined the sect after his demonic cultivation, no one would have touched the inner armor or discovered the secret within. Every chi refinement warrior would choose something that was useful to them in the spirit weapon chamber. Who would choose the mystic gold silk armor? Chi refinement warriors had no use for it. Even if perfected Jin Dan had cultivated body tempering techniques and had a strong physique, he would not be interested in this broken connate spirit weapon. However, Suzimo could already refine inferior grade spirit weapons on his own. He was not interested in the spirit weapons in the spirit weapon chamber, and that was the reason why he chose this strange inner armor. This was completely a coincidence, a stroke of luck. The last 3 words of the sentence, the fated person, seemed to have an additional meaning at this moment. Suzimo smiled. The temperament of this expert of the sect was indeed strange. Although he had betrayed the sect, he left this cultivation technique behind. Furthermore, he did not choose to leave it behind directly. Instead, he used another method. In reality, Suzimo had just entered the cultivation world, and had only come into contact with the Qi condensation manual. He had not even learned any spirit arts. How could he comprehend anything from the sound of thunder? It was the same for this expert of the sect back then. If he did not have this Void Thunder manual, how could he have purged the fiend chi in his body when he was trapped in Thunderclap Valley? As Su Zimo pondered, the first piece of paper in his palm shattered into dust and scattered in the air. It had been too long and the piece of paper had long been eroded by time, turning into dust under the vibration of the thunder. Logically speaking, the second piece of paper should have been around for a longer time. However, it was still in its original state. Su Zimo rubbed it carefully and discovered that the material of the piece of paper was special. It was rough and tough, and even after so many years, the words on it could still be seen clearly. Su Zimo looked at the crack at the bottom of the piece of paper and his heart skipped a beat. He exerted strength with both hands and suddenly pulled at the piece of paper. It did not budge at all. At that moment, Su Zimo was in his demonic form, and could even snap a pseudo-spirit weapon if he exerted strength with both hands. However, the piece of paper was perfectly fine. Ancient ruin. Su Zimo recalled a piece of information mentioned by this expert of the sect and fell into deep thought. He learned from Senior Crane that Tianhuang mainland had already experienced two eras. The first was the primordial era and the second was the ancient era. Since it was an ancient ruin, there was a high chance that the Void Thunder manual was a cultivation technique left behind from the ancient era. Su Zimo's eyes lit up gradually. Just the piece of paper that recorded the Void Thunder manual in the ancient era was already so extraordinary. This cultivation technique must have a great background as well. Su Zimo began to look at the piece of paper. The first line he saw was Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra. When he saw those words, Su Zimo nodded to himself. Right now, he was cultivating the marrow cleansing section of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. What was recorded on the piece of paper was a sutra for marrow cleansing as well. There was a high chance that the fusion of the two sutras could resolve the latent problems in his body completely. Su Zimo suppressed his excitement and began to cultivate the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra amidst the rumbling thunder. Chapter 137. Few days later. In Thunderclap Valley, a green-robed scholar sat on the ground and let out a series of strange sounds as he breathed in and out. Huff-hum. Rumble. If anyone were to stand beside the green-robed scholar, they would be able to hear the shuddering sounds of tigers and leopards coming from his body as he breathed in and out. In between the sounds of tigers and leopards, there was a rumbling sound of thunder. Bewitching and ferocious, the two completely different sounds vibrated his bone marrow and created new blood. His bloodline circulated and surged like a tsunami. Cultivating the Void Thunder manual was easier than Su Zimo had imagined. Be it the marrow cleansing section of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, or the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra of the Void Thunder manual, the principle was to make use of the power of sound to vibrate the bone marrow and achieve the effect of cleansing the marrow and changing the blood. With the foundation of the marrow cleansing section and the sutra on the remnant page, Su Zimo quickly grasped the mysteries behind it. For others, the strange environment of Thunderclap Valley was unbearable. However, for Su Zimo, who cultivated the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra, it was like a divine aid. As time passed by, Su Zimo gradually integrated the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra into the marrow cleansing section and formed a unique breathing technique of his own tiger leopard thunder. Su Zimo could clearly feel the demonic chi in his body being cleansed by the thunder. However, the power of his bloodline was perfectly preserved. Furthermore, with the help of the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra, the power of his bloodline became even stronger and more terrifying. In just a month's time, Su Zimo had already attained lesser mastery of the marrow cleansing section. According to the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, lesser mastery of the marrow cleansing section could allow one to kill early-stage foundation establishment cultivators with ease and fight against mid-stage foundation establishment cultivators in terms of strength. However, Su Zimo's situation was slightly different. Because he cultivated the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra, the power of his bloodline was stronger, and he had an additional violent power of thunder. There was a high chance that he could fight against late-stage foundation establishment cultivators. Of course, this was purely a comparison of strength. In a fight between cultivators, strength was only one aspect. In the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had been in Thunderclap Valley for 3 months. During this period of time, What made him the happiest was that the demonic chi in his blood had been completely washed away. After cultivating the tiger-leopard thunderous roar, the newly born bloodline would still contain demonic chi, but at the same time it would be washed away by the thunderous roar. From now on, not only could Su Zimo continue cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, he could also use the power of his bloodline at will without any reservations. This would become his greatest trump card. From this day onwards, Su Zimo wore the mystic gold silk armor on the inside and a green robe on the outside. He carried the weight of 10,000 pounds on his back and trained hard in the Thunder Valley. At first Su Zimo was not used to it. Wearing the mystic gold silk armor was equivalent to carrying a mountain. It was extremely difficult to move around, let alone cultivate the various killer moves in the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness. However, as time passed by and the power of his bloodline grew stronger, Su Zimo gradually got used to it. Whether he walked or sat, he looked no different from usual. Even if someone saw Su Zimo again, they would not realize that he was wearing an inner armor that weighed 10,000 pounds. The tempering of his skin, flesh, tendons and bones was extremely obvious through such heavy cultivation. There were improvements in the first 4 sections of the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness: body tempering, tendons transformation, bone strengthening and marrow cleansing at the same time. Of course, that was not the only surprise that the ancient cultivation technique, Void Thunder Manual, brought to Su Zimo. There were also a few thunder arts recorded on the remnant page. Initially, Su Zimo did not pay much attention to it. After all, thunder arts were also a type of spirit art. His cultivation realm was not at foundation establishment realm and his spirit chi had not transformed into spirit energy. He could not release it even if he cultivated it. However, after cultivating the Thunder Marrow Cleansing Sutra, Su Zimo realized that there was a power of thunder in his bloodline. The power of thunder was hidden in his bloodline and did not belong to the category of spirit energy. However, with the power of thunder in his bloodline, not only could Su Zimo cultivate the thunder arts on the remnant page, he could even release them. This meant that Su Zimo, who was still a chi refinement warrior, could release spirit arts that only foundation establishment cultivators could release. Furthermore, it was the most ferocious type of spirit arts, thunder arts. After all, he did not have a thunder spirit root. Su Zimo was not sensitive to thunder, and it was extremely difficult for him to cultivate thunder arts. However, this was Thunderclap Valley after all, and Su Zimo was here to welcome the first thunderclap of spring. In the skies, blazing thunderbolts flashed and snaked like snakes, as though they were tearing the heavens apart. They descended with an aura that could destroy everything. In order to experience the power of thunder better, Su Zimo tried to guide thunder into his body. It was an extremely dangerous move. Each time, Su Zimo would be charred black from the electricity, and his flesh would be torn apart with injuries all over his body. Even with the mystic gold silk armor, he could not defend against it. Thankfully, after cultivating the mystic classic of the 12 demon kings of the great wilderness, Su Zimo's recovery speed was shocking and he could recover fully after resting for a few days. In this valley, Su Zimo endured unimaginable torture and pain. He wanted to become stronger. He wanted to be strong enough to take revenge for Zhui Feng, strong enough to stand before Chen Mengqi once more, and strong enough to follow in Dai Yu's footsteps. Each time Su Zimo wanted to give up, he would recall Dai Yu's words. If you want to be a dragon or elephant, you have to be a horse or an ox for all living beings. Cultivation was a heaven-defying act to begin with, let alone immortality and demonic cultivation. From the moment he embarked on this path, Su Zimo was destined to endure more pain and pressure than others. After cultivating the few thunder arts on the remnant page, everything on the remnant page was imprinted in his mind. At the end of the remnant page, there was a unique thunder art mentioned, Thunderclap Kill. The release of thunder arts was almost always accompanied by the power of thunder. However, Thunderclap Kill released the power of thunder purely. The power of sound. The power of sound was the easiest to ignore. However, it contained an unimaginable might. Using sound to vibrate one's bone marrow and create bloodlines was a manifestation of the power of sound. After all, the release of thunder arts required one to conjure hand seals and circulate mental cultivation techniques. However, the release of sound was an instantaneous power. If it was used properly in battle, it would bring about unexpected results. Unfortunately, the remnant page was torn off, and Su Zimo had no way of knowing about Thunderclap Kill. However, Su Zimo had once witnessed a powerful spirit demon release a ferocious roar in Songlang Mountain Range and kill a spirit beast on the spot. That scene was still fresh in Su Zimo's mind and gave him some inspiration. Time flew, and in the blink of an eye, Su Zimo had already been in Thunderclap Valley for half a year. To the disciples of the sect, Su Zimo must have had a hard time improving his cultivation during this period of time when he was trapped in Thunderclap Valley. However, no one knew that Su Zimo had completed his transformation in Thunderclap Valley. Although his cultivation realm did not increase, his combat strength had more than doubled. Chapter 138. This day, a resounding cry of a crane could be heard, even suppressing the rumbling of thunder in the valley. After half a year, the crane had descended upon Thunderclap Valley once more. By the time she landed on the ground, she had already transformed into a red-haired beauty. When she swept her gaze across Su Zimo, she exclaimed softly, "You succeeded?" Su Zimo nodded and bowed. "Thank you, Senior." Even though the Void Thunder manual was not left behind by the crane, if not for her appearance half a year ago, Su Zimo would not have come here, nor would he have been able to make use of the rumbling of the thunder to resolve the issue in his bloodline. "Not bad," the red-haired beauty praised. "Let's go. There's no point in staying here any longer." With that, she waved her sleeves and left Thunderclap Valley with Su Zimo. The wind howled, and in the blink of an eye, the two of them arrived above Weapon Peak. "You can head down now. Try to raise your cultivation as soon as possible and enter Foundation Establishment Realm to become an Inner Sect disciple." The red-haired beauty continued, "Even though Ethereal Sword isn't a match for your sword formation, the true strength of Ethereal Sword isn't its strength. Instead, it's its unpredictable sword-wielding technique. Firstly, he did not manage to unleash the true might of Ethereal Sword and chose to fight you head-on. Secondly, he has only cultivated level 1 of Ethereal Sword, Afterimage." Su Zimo nodded. How could something that could be considered as one of the 3 great secret skills of the sect, and even the foundation of Ethereal Sect's position as one of the 5 major sects, be ordinary? After pondering for a moment, the red-haired beauty continued, "After becoming an Inner Sect disciple, you must not slack off. You have to raise your cultivation as soon as possible and fight for a position as a legacy disciple, so that you can obtain the right to learn the sect's secret skills. Apart from Ethereal Sword, the other 2 secret skills are rather important to you as well. In fact, there's even a secret skill that can increase your melee combat strength tremendously." When he heard that, Su Zimo's eyes lit up. Melee combat was his greatest trump card. The stronger that trump card was, the stronger he would be and the safer he would be in the cultivation world. After a few more reminders, the crane turned and left. Su Zimo descended on Weapon Peak slowly. There wasn't much change in Weapon Peak in half a year. Su Zimo saw some familiar faces around the crafting hall. Junior brother Su is back. When Shui saw Su Zimo, a smile appeared on his face. He greeted him and quickly walked over. The surrounding Weapon Peak disciples looked over as well. After half a year, the disciples of Weapon Peak had improved in their cultivation. Shui had already reached the pinnacle of perfected qi condensation, and could step into Foundation Establishment at any moment. Everyone knew that Su Zimo must have suffered a lot in the past 6 months in Lane Valley, so they did not mention it at all. They just casually talked about the changes in the sect. Half a year ago, after Feng Haoyu suffered a crushing defeat, he did not collapse. Instead, he focused even more on his cultivation and completely gave up on unorthodox techniques such as pill refinement and weapon refinement. After becoming an inner disciple, it took Feng Haoyu less than half a year to reach the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. Within the inner disciples, he was quite famous and powerful. A month ago, Feng Haoyu had just advanced to mid-stage Foundation Establishment, when he defeated a late-stage Foundation Establishment senior brother in Ethereal Main Peak, making a name for himself. Even though Feng Haoyu was only at mid-stage Foundation Establishment, there were already rumors in the inner sect that he was the number 1 apart from legacy disciples. It wouldn't be long before Feng Haoyu became a true legacy disciple. Even Long Ro with a variant spirit root could not compare to that frightening cultivation speed. Of course, Lung Ro was also an inner sect disciple, and was at the peak of early-stage foundation establishment. After chatting with Shui and the others for a while, Su Zimo left and returned to his cave abode. Ling Hu and Little Crane were guarding the place. When they saw Su Zimo return, they were naturally delighted. The tiger and crane pondered that they would have elixirs to eat from now on. Not long after Su Zimo sat down, the sound of clothes fluttering could be heard from outside. The person arrived at the entrance of the cave abode with heavy footsteps. Su Zimo smiled faintly and guessed the person's identity. Waving his robes gently, the door of the cave abode opened. "Bro, I missed you so much." Little Fatty ran over and gave Su Zimo a bear hug passionately. "Bro, you're amazing." Nothing happened even after staying in Thunderclap Valley for half a year. Little Fatty chuckled. "You're not too bad yourself. You're already at early-stage foundation establishment." It was easy to detect Little Fatty's cultivation realm using the spirit peering art. Little Fatty chuckled. Seeing that Su Zimo was still at level 9 chi condensation and had not improved at all in half a year, he thought that Su Zimo was feeling depressed and consoled. "Bro, don't be discouraged. Given your potential, it's only a matter of time before you catch up to us." Su Zimo smiled. Su Zimo had already expended a lot of inferior-grade spirit stones to break through to level 9 chi condensation. If he wanted to break through to perfected chi condensation, he would need even more spirit stones. But now Su Zimo's storage bag was empty. Without enough spirit stones and perfect chi gathering elixirs, it would be difficult for him to catch up to Little Fatty and the others. Noticing that Su Zimo seemed to have something on his mind, Little Fatty pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Right, bro. A few of us inner sect disciples are going out for a sect mission tomorrow. Why don't you come with us and relax?" "Inner sect mission?" Su Zimo shook his head. "I'm still a trial disciple. I'm not qualified to do an inner sect mission." Little Fatty waved it off with a smile. "It's fine, bro. It's not like you'll be in the way. Besides," pausing for a moment, Little Fatty said mysteriously, "Bro, this sect mission is rather simple. If you come along, you can even get some spirit stones to use." Oh, Su Zimo was tempted. Right now, he was in need of spirit stones. Su Zimo asked, "What kind of mission is it?" A disciple of the sect who is out for training discovered a spirit mine outside Linfeng City, and is currently mining it. Since this senior brother is alone, he's worried that other itinerant cultivators might covet the spirit mine. Therefore, he asked the sect to send a few cultivators to support him and bring the spirit stones back to the sect at the same time. Little Fatty winked. "I've already asked around in the sect. For a mission like this, the sect won't care even if we secretly take some spirit stones from the mine." Su Zimo was deep in thought. Thinking that Su Zimo was worried about his safety, Little Fatty chuckled. "Bro, don't worry. It's just an inferior grade spirit mine, and most of the spirit stones mined are inferior grade. Even if there are some middle-grade spirit stones, it's extremely limited. With a foundation establishment cultivator leading the team, there won't be any danger at all. Furthermore, our ethereal sect is one of the 5 major sects of the Great Zhou dynasty. Even if there are itinerant cultivators who have the intention of snatching the spirit mine, they won't have the guts to do so. When we reach Linfeng City of Qi Country, even the city lord will have to treat us well when he sees us. We'll just keep watch there for a couple of days and return with the spirit stones after the mining is done." "All right," Su Zimo agreed. Little Fatty raised his brow and gave a strange smile. "Bro, we'll gather at the front mountain tomorrow morning. There's still a surprise, eh?"